Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Dkeu Joins Villain Retirement Home. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. All for One, or Tenki Shigaraki as he was known now, was somewhat bored. Admittedly, it was his own fault. He was the one who up and decided to retire and set himself up in this retirement home for reformed supervillains. He'd just been tired, looking for a change in pace, and decided to come here. He'd left Tamura in charge with all the stuff he'd need, and entered himself into the retirement home for reformed villains. It had been good for a long while, trading stories of his villainy with the other people, doing activities he'd hardly even gotten to do as a kid, so that was fun, but he was getting a bit bored and restless. Then the manager person announced they'd be getting a new person, a kid who was going to be volunteering here. Well, maybe it'd be fun to terrorize the squirt when he arrived. The other residents seemed to be thinking the same thing. They were villains at some point after all. What was wrong with a bit of mild tormenting of a kid who volunteered to do it? Just a bit of mostly harmless fun. The kid, no more than perhaps 13, arrived roughly 20 minutes later, entering somewhat timidly, hands quivering slightly. Residents, this is Isizuku Midaria. He'll be helping around here and interacting with you all. Treat him gently, he's Quirkless. Midaria, where had he heard that name before? He'd have to think on it. Tenki watched with no little interest as the kid flinched at the designation, watching them all warily from under his bangs. He had little doubt that most of the residents had little interest in treating the kid gently. Most were from generations that had a lot of quirkless people, and he himself was from the first generation where almost everyone was quirkless. Hey kid! Hitsugi Tenjia, quirk, hiding in plain sight. Deceptively powerful. Wasn't actually caught, turned himself in. The kid turned to face him, then lit up. You're Waldo. Or I guess your quirk is so cool. He devolved into muttering, and Tenki listened with interest. Can always hide in plain sight, no matter how busy the area or what he's wearing, really useful in not getting caught, weak to mental quirks. Well, now he was mildly impressed. Few people, let alone kids, would have managed that. Let alone recognizing Hitsugi. I'm flattered, Hitsugi said amusedly. But call me Hitsugi, I am retired and reformed. Izuku bobbed his head quickly. Of course. Well, maybe this wasn't going to be to his disadvantage. Maybe he'd be getting something out of this whole adventure besides some new tactics other villains have used. The kid was clearly intelligent, and with his quirkless status had all the spite needed to become a backup inheritor if Tamura failed. Yes, that would do well. Tamura had been rather unstable anyway, and it would be good to have a backup plan. Izuku had decided to volunteer at the retirement home in hopes that it would appear on his record and help UA or whatever school he applied to look past his quirklessness. He'd researched villains from the right time era for the 2 weeks before the volunteering started. They had to check his paperwork, and his mom's, then his father's, which was a whole hassle. But finally, everything had been approved, and Izuku was clear to start volunteering. Due to his researching frenzy the past 2 weeks, Izuku could safely identify all but one of the reformed villains in the room. Waldo was the one who'd spoken. Shadow Dancer and Mastermind were playing chess in the corner, with Bullseye watching them. Mimic was over there, doing a puzzle with what looked like Puppeteer and Blackout. Night Flare and Yggdrasil were playing checkers in a different corner. Jester sprawled on a couch nearby, staring at him curiously. Armory was absent-mindedly flipping a knife between her fingers as she watched him, and Chiroptera was hanging from the ceiling like a bat. Thanatos and Insector were sitting on a couch, a little line of bugs circling Insector's hand. Quickstep was fiddling with a crow stuffed animal for some reason. Hey! Quickstep said first, grinning. Hello, Izuku stuttered, bowing slightly to the reformed villain. Why, you're Quickstep, alright? Please, just call me Zhen, less formal that way. I'm old and retired dash. Stop calling yourself old, Night Flare snapped annoyedly. You're barely a child. If I'm a child, then what does that make him? Zhen complained, pointing to Izuku. A baby, Night Flare decided after a moment, moving a piece. Check. Yggdrasil pouted comically. Rude. It was just so fascinating to see all of them up close, Izuku decided as Yggdrasil and Night Flare started squabbling. If a bit odd to see them squabbling like children. So, I assume you recognize most of us? Armory asked, tilting her head curiously. Why yeah. Izuku agreed enthusiastically. You're Armory. Right. She smirked. Call me Heike Kid. Can you name anyone else in this room? Yeah. Izuku started pointing to the retired villains as he named them off. Night Flare, Yggdrasil, Chiroptera, Jester, Thanatos, Insector, Shadow Dancer, Puppeteer, Blackout, Mimic, Bullseye, Mastermind and Waldo or Hitugi. Sorry sir, I'm not quite sure who you are. I'm not surprised, he noted calmly. You may call me Tenki. Izuku dipped into a quick bow addressed to the room at large. Hello. He could tell they were all assessing him, and he fervently hoped that he was doing fine. What if he wasn't? What if they were judging him for being quirkless? So what do you know about knives? Arm Heike said, flipping the knife up and catching it by the blade. Teeth are sharp? Izuku offered. Short-range weapons, although when thrown can be mid to long range. Have a short reach, better used by either taller people who can make up the reach themselves, or short people who use the knife to get into people's space to get out of their opponent's range and into their own. He stopped abruptly, flushing bright red when he realized he'd been rambling. Very good, Heike said, the knife disappearing somewhere. So, did the nurses tell you what you were going to be doing here? Izuku shrugged. Mostly just entertaining you and helping them with tasks I guess. Cool, Puppeteer said, smiling. We should probably introduce ourselves. I was Puppeteer at one point, and you can call me Ninjaomi. Or Nin if you'd prefer. Izuku nodded quickly, storing the information in his brain. He would remember. He couldn't afford to forget a name here. This was his best chance at getting into UA. Even without a quirk. Your Q quirk is really cool, and how? St strong you've gotten it through practice? C can you interrogate with it? What breaks people out? How long can you hold people under your quirk? C can you hold multiple people under? She chuckled, and Izuku stopped immediately, blushing heavily. I can't, although I suspect that if my quirk was a bit stronger, I could try. A simple touch will break the hold I have. I can hold people under for up to 8 hours if my hold isn't forcibly broken, and I can hold up to 3 people under. Izuku wasn't sure what to make of that, other than storing the information quickly. No one replied to his rambles, usually just telling him to shut up. I was Night Flare, and that idiot was Yggdrasil, Night Flare drawled. He can grow trees, I can make black fire. But it's made me go blind in recent years. I'll go by Kuro and he'll go by Mokusei. The Yggdrasil, Izuku corrected himself, was annoyed by not getting his own introduction. He showed it for approximately 20 seconds, then went back to trying to beat Kuro at checkers. You have quite an interesting skill there, young man, but perhaps learn to encrypt your notes and stop the muttering habit. Tenki said, smiling at Izuku. Izuku attempted to stutter out a reply, but only an unintelligible mess came out. Tenki just looked amused. Perhaps how to speak would also be in order. He had clearly said it in teasing, so unlike Kaken's angry degrading comments. Izuku decided to not talk again for the moment, his face currently a flaming red. Jester giggled, eyes alight with amusement. I was Jester in my time, but you can call me Sun now. Izuku bowed shallowly, probably still blushing up a storm. It's nice to meet you all. Nice to meet you too, kid, Jin said, waving. If you'll excuse me, I need a nap. How late are you here? At 4 o'clock, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head. I have to be back in time for dinner or Mom'll worry. Jin disappeared into one of the hallways, and Izuku was left standing there awkwardly. So, he said cautiously, what do you do usually? Heike flipped another knife through her fingers. Mokusei and Kuro are almost always playing checkers. It's them wishing they were 40 years younger and could still spar with each other. Hey! Kuro complained. She isn't wrong, Mokusei muttered, and Kuro bopped him on the head in retaliation. I do a lot of target practice, Heike continued, seemingly uncaring of the two squabbling. I could teach you if you wanted. Izuku couldn't believe it. She was offering to teach him, a quirkless kid, when she was a former supervillain, and a very good one at that, to throw knives. He'd have to take advantage of it while it lasted, and she inevitably tried to baby him because of his missing quirk. Sure, I love to. Izuku smiled, trying to inject as much enthusiasm as he could manage into his voice. She smiled indulgently, getting up from the chair, stretching. Izuku winced slightly, hearing her spine pop a dozen times. She laughed, seeing his wince. The price of being extremely active in my youth, I'm afraid. I'm practically more scar tissue than skin. Actually, I probably am. She laughed again, beckoning. Come on, the yard's out here. Izuku followed her out, watching curiously as she dropped by her room to collect 4 pouches, in addition to the 2 she already had on her legs. What are those for? Oh, they hold weapons. I'm not technically allowed to hide them in my clothing, so I have a dozen or more pouches of them in my room. And these are only the knives and shuriken. Heike shrugged, and although Izuku couldn't see her face, he assumed she was grinning. The yard was a big area, a pool on one side, and a large open field to the other side. One side of the field had a row of targets set up, already riddled with holes. Heike led him to stand around 4 feet away from the targets. We'll start close like this and slowly get farther away, all right? Heike handed him one of the pouches. Strap this onto your thigh. It'll be easier than putting these on the ground. Izuku took the pouch, figured out which way was the top, and tried to strap it onto his thigh, only for it to slide down his leg. Heike chuckled, taking one of hers off. Forgot that it takes a bit to figure out how to put these on. Here, watch me and watch where I put the straps. Izuku watched carefully as she wrapped it onto her leg, then tried to copy it on his own. It stayed on this time, and Izuku didn't move for fear it would slide down his leg again. Tighten the straps a bit, Heike advised. It needs to hold up its own weight, and trust me when I say, it's meant to last and to be worn in battle. Izuku stared at it with no little interest as he tightened the straps holding it in place. He could see the scratches and a few repaired places on it, although it almost looked brand new. You really can't get stuff like it these days, Heike sighed. The material that's made out of is basically invincible. I swear, I've tried to have Kuro burn it, and it didn't work. I'm telling you, that stuff will last forever. Izuku stared at her. I can get Kuro to show you if you want, Heike offered, pointing back towards the building. And no thank you. Izuku stuttered quickly. He didn't want her to destroy one of the pouches for his sake. She hummed doubtfully but dropped it. Right, so open the pouch. Inside there should be 5 throwing knives and 10 shuriken. Which do you want to start with? Izuku opened the pouch, eyeing the insides. Which is harder? Well, he was kinda asking what was more dangerous, since he might as well get that out of the way while he was still allowed to do it. Heike hummed. That depends. Knives can do worse damage, but shuriken are more prone to small cuts. Izuku considered that. He'd have to be careful if he did shuriken, so he didn't get too many cuts, so his mom didn't fret over him. Although it doesn't particularly matter either way, Heike continued, pulling a pair of small gloves out of one of the pouches. Since you'll be wearing these. They were my first pair as a kid, and saved me from getting my fingers cut off quite a few times. Izuku took them when they were handed to him, and was surprised at the weight. If why you don't mind me asking, are they so heavy? She smirked. You know what my quirk is, right? Why you can enhance metal near you, Izuku replied instantly. Increases its sharpness, durability, and hardness. That's correct. See, I didn't have great control over my quirk as a young kid, so I narrowly avoided missing fingers because of those gloves. There's a metal weave in the fabric, so when I reinforced my knives and such, I reinforced the gloves as well. Izuku got it now. So you had the metal in the G gloves protecting your F fingers when you practiced. She gave him finger guns. I think they may fit you? You have kinda small hands. I have a few other sizes in here I think. I needed those gloves up until high school. Izuku slid on the gloves, marveling at how maneuverable they were. Aside from the weight, he could barely tell they were on at all. They didn't hinder his fingers at all. Oh good, they fit, Heike sounded somewhat relieved. So you keep those, and let's start with shuriken, shall we? Izuku's attempt at protesting the gift of the gloves was handily ignored, so he pulled out the shuriken, being careful even with the gloves on. Hold them like this, Heike said, pulling out one of her own and demonstrating for him. Izuku copied best he could, holding the shuriken like she was. She adjusted a few of his fingers, then demonstrated throwing one. It landed right in the center of the target. Not too hard, but requires practice. Izuku threw his, and it fell to the ground almost a foot from the target. Put a bit more force into it next time, Heike encouraged. You'll find that too much force is often just enough. Unless you have a strength quirk I don't know about, you can't put too much force behind it, alright? Izuku nodded, grabbing another. She corrected his hands again, and he threw it, this time embedding it into the wood underneath the target. Good job. It took me ages to even hit the area around the pole, let alone the pole itself. She clapped him on the back. You did good, kid. Izuku immediately teared up and started crying. No one had told him that he'd done good before. And he hadn't even hit the target. Heike calmly pulled out tissues, offering them to him, and waited patiently for him to calm down, which only made him cry harder, because she was so nice, and knew he was quirkless and everything. When his tears finally stopped, Heike had run out of tissues. I'll have to carry more around, she joked, elbowing him lightly. Oh no, I can carry my own, I wouldn't want to bother you. Izuku said quickly, waving his arms in front of him. Nah, you're good kid. At least you aren't a disaster crier like Mokusei is. Which is why I have tissues at all. Just means I have to carry twice as many. And I have to have something hidden in all my hidden pockets. She patted his shoulder and gestured to the pouch. Come on, let's try again. You have another, she glanced at the sun. Looks like. Let's do shuriken for another 20 minutes then move on, Izuku nodded quickly, determined to do his best. He wanted to be a hero, right? So, Heike said, what do you want to do when you grow up? Izuku froze, barely registering that his shuriken landed in the outer ring. And nothing important. She raised an eyebrow. Is that so? And here I could have sworn you wanted to go into a profession where being able to use sharp and pointy things is useful. Izuku flushed, looking away. You want to be a hero? He mumbled out quickly. A good profession, she hummed. If a dangerous one. I should know, I went up against many heroes in my time. Izuku nodded quickly, happy to latch onto it. Like your fight with Thundering Whisper. She glanced at him in surprise. Maybe I should stop being so surprised when you spout on information no one knows anymore. You'll give me more wrinkles than I already have. She ruffled his hair, and Izuku flinched in surprise. So, he said, quick to change the subject. See, can you sense what things you've used your Q quirk on? Heike hummed. It's kind of like recognizing someone you've met twice before. A vague recognition of I've used that object, but no real connection. I can't sense where the objects are or anything. I can cancel them at any time however. So can you cancel just their affected metals in 1A area? Izuku wondered, restraining himself from going on a muttered rant. Well, it has to be within my vision range, Heike admitted. Or I can't cancel the effect properly. Izuku nodded excitedly, then fumbled with a shuriken he'd pulled out of the pouch and it fell, but didn't cut any of his fingers because of the gloves. And that is why you're wearing gloves, Heike said, grinning. Izuku sheepishly picked up the now somewhat dirty shuriken. Sorry. She eyed him for a moment, then gestured to his pouch. It's no issue. Let's do the knives now. Looks like you have a bit of practicing to do with the shuriken, but I have no doubt you'll be fine to practice on your own for a while. Just try and pick a target that won't walk away, alright? She grinned playfully, pulling out one of the knives. Izuku shook his head frantically. I wouldn't. She sighed. I was joking, Izuku. Oh, he said sheepishly. Izuku had to admit to himself that there was a reason he hadn't told his mom he was volunteering at a retirement home for reformed supervillains. She'd probably ban him from doing it, and this was really his only option. He'd do anything to get into UA and become a hero, and if it meant hiding a bit of information from his mom, he'd do it. He just said he was hanging out with friends to explain it away to his mom. She was delighted to hear that, of course, and Izuku dreaded the time she asked him to bring them home. At least he didn't have to fake his cheer when he got home. He was really happy, and it probably showed. If the way his mom burst into happy tears as soon as he got home was any indication, it did show. Izuku, of course, started crying too, but they had always both been sympathy criers. Izuku hadn't wanted to fall behind in anything, so he'd left Wednesday as an open homework day. He was almost dreading it now, fearing that he would go back to the home on Thursday and find it had all been a dream. For now, he'd just have to focus on the now, which was Tuesday. Just as he'd been leaving, Tenki had stopped him, asking to see any notebooks Izuku had. Izuku had been surprised Tenki had guessed that he had notebooks, but agreed. They didn't seem like the type to destroy his notebooks, but he didn't pack the notebook he had on them anyway. "I'm so glad your friends are taking interest in your hobbies," his mother cried upon seeing his backpack. "Why yeah," Izuku muttered, adjusting his backpack. "They're excited to see all my notes," Inko cried. Further, and Izuku quickly left, not willing to cry and be late. When he got in there, only Tenki was in the main room waiting for him. Izuku waved timidly before sitting down across from him at the table. "I assume you brought the notebooks?" Tenki asked, looking rather amused. Izuku nodded quickly, pushing his backpack up onto the table and opening it. He'd brought the pouch and the gloves, just in case he'd be practicing with Heike again. Maybe she could show him how to put on the pouch again. He hadn't managed to do it on his own yet. If she didn't mind, of course. He pulled the notebooks out of his backpack, stacking them in numerical order. 1 to 10 with the 1 on the villain's number, but he just had 1 to 10 here. Tenki plucked the first one off the top, opening it and scanning it. Izuku straightened the pile nervously. "Tenki!" "Seen it was Sun," said, coming over to glare at Tenki. "Why didn't you tell us he arrived?" "He just got here," Tenki replied dryly. "I haven't had the time." Sun eyed him suspiciously, but shrugged, dropping it easily. "That's a lot of notebooks you got there, kid," she said teasingly, nudging Izuku. Izuku blushed. "It's a lot of information," Tenki said, turning a page. "We are so going to design a code or two for you. This would be dangerous in the wrong hands." Sun looked over his shoulder. "Geez, kid, most professional analysis people aren't half as good, and they train for years." She straightened, stretching. "I'm gonna go tell everyone you're here. I'd be super hypocritical if I didn't." It's really nothing special," Izuku tried to protest. Tenki gave him a very unimpressed eyebrow raise. "I have been alive for nearly a century, child. I bet, if you gave an analysis like this to a pro hero anonymously, they'd think you were a retired pro hero or a professional analyst." Heike entered the room, coming to look over Tenki's shoulder. "He's right, fledgling. If you ever decide heroics aren't for you, you have a very promising career as an analyst open to you. Tenki already mentioned a code, right?" "Yeah," Izuku said curiously. Heike picked up one of the other notebooks, opening it and flipping through it quickly. "You're going to need it. If this gets into a villain's hands, it could be very dangerous. If villains even caught wind of this, you'd be quite the target." "Be careful who you show these to," Kurai said, sort of appearing out of the shadows. Izuku jumped at his appearance. Kurai flipped through a notebook Izuku hadn't seen him grab. "Villains aren't the only ones you'd have to look out for if your skill for analysis got out." Izuku blinked in confusion at him. "What?" "While the fact you don't actually have a quirk will be a huge benefit to you in this situation," Tenki said, putting the notebook down in favor of lacing his fingers together in front of his face. "It's still dangerous to you. A good section of the people here became supervillains because they saw no other way to change the world. Almost everyone here will have experienced bullying at the least, harassment and outright abuse at the worst, just because of their quirks." Izuku had known quirk discrimination was a thing, but it was something completely different to see it up close. He'd experienced quirkless discrimination, but he knew it was a whole other ballgame to quirk discrimination. "The dangerous nature of my quirk when I was a kid caused a lot of accidents where my quirk went off and injured many people," Heike admitted. "I got control of it as I got older and trained more, but the stigma followed me. So I made the best of it. They wanted danger? They got danger. Shadows are traditionally associated with darkness. With villains, they saw a villain, they got a villain, Kurai said, a deep frown marring his face. Izuku sighed in a deep breath. Understand, child, Tenki said calmly. What you see as heroic because you can see the innate heroic potential a quirk has is not always seen by society. My quirk, all for one, can take and give quirks. Tenki took a deep breath and looked Izuku in the eyes. Izuku stared back. Just because my quirk has enormous potential to allow people unhappy with their quirks, or those whose bodies are ill-suited for their quirks, or even for providing quirkless people with a chance to be seen as human, given a courtesy they should have even without a quirk, doesn't mean that's what it's seen as. Izuku understood. People saw stigma, saw only a chance that their quirk, the thing most define themselves by, to be taken away. Stuff like that is technically illegal, Heike said, sighing. But it's never enforced. Our society runs on there always being more villains to fight. Almost all villains, small time or not, were forced into the dark due to something or another. Some got out, most stayed, too embroiled in the underground to ever emerge. You guys got out, Izuku said hesitantly. Kurai shrugged. Part of you never leaves the dark. Don't dabble in it, kid, don't even dip your metaphorical toe in. Underground heroics toes the line between hero, vigilante, and villain. Heroes there have to be very careful lest they go undercover and never come out. This is not intending to scare you, Tenki said quickly, reaching across to put his hand on Izuku's shoulder. No matter how much it seems that way. Izuku nodded cautiously, his brain running a mile a minute. Although do remember, kid, Heike said, setting the notebook she'd been reading back on the table as well. Not all above-ground heroes are as noble as some underground heroes can be. Endeavor and Eraserhead, for example, Tenki said, smiling slightly. Eraserhead is a very good hero, although it is rare indeed to find people who know of him. He takes care of villains swiftly and with care. Unless they are of a very specific subtype, they will often come in basically or entirely uninjured. And Endeavor has the highest villain and civilian casualty rate of the top heroes. Izuku finished, knowing full well the stats the number 2 hero had. Tenki inclined his head. Exactly. What's the subtype you mentioned? Izuku asked after a moment. He was genuinely curious. He hadn't seen any videos of Eraserhead using more force than was perhaps strictly necessary. Anything having to do with the violation of human rights? Heike answered for Tenki. Human traffickers, child abusers, kidnappers, that kind. She shrugged. Honestly, I don't blame him for being rough with them. I may have been a very good supervillain in my time, but at least I had morals. You almost got the serial killer designation for murdering RPSTS and pedophiles, Kurai said, pointing at her. Don't play innocent. We've all heard the tales. Heike shrugged again, completely unrepentant. They all deserved it. Any traffickers and abusers didn't even get my attention, I just got minions to herd them near my fights and I killed them in collateral damage. Which is why you had such a high civilian death rate for a reformed supervillain, Izuku said quickly, eager to show his knowledge. Bingo! She gave him finger guns. They also all deserved it. Tenki chuckled. You'll find that most of the reformed villains here are, or were like that. They had morals and stuck to them. That's why we're reformed, Heike agreed, laughing. Although Ninjaomi went ahead and reformed herself for her kid, so she doesn't count. She counts plenty, Kurai argued. Reforming and retiring for her son definitely shows some degree of morals. She has the lowest civilian death rate among all of you, Izuku volunteered, immediately shrinking into his seat when they looked at him. Very good, Tenki praised calmly. Would you prefer if we got started on a code right now, or did something else? Izuku considered that. A code would probably more useful right now, so he'd do that. He wouldn't risk doing something else in case they realized how useless and helpless and weak he was. See codes if you don't mind. Tenki stared at him evenly for a long moment, and Izuku shifted awkwardly. Alright, if you cannot break the muttering habit, we'll find a language for you to learn so those around you don't understand you. While it won't work on polyglot quirks, I'm sure we can find a language no one knows anymore. It's a layer of security if you are incapable of breaking the habit. Izuku nodded hesitantly. He'd learn what he could while they still thought he was useful. While they didn't consider him something to be kept in a plastic container and kept safe from the world because he was useless, weak, helpless, and couldn't protect himself. He resolved to learn as quickly as possible, so he could learn more with the limited time he had. Thanatos ambushed Izuku by the door. Metaphorically, of course. Izuku had to dig through his brain to remember the man's name. Was it Elidor? Yeah, Elidor. Hey kid, do you know anything of how to fight? Izuku paused, then shook his head cautiously. He eyed the main room, which didn't have Tenki in it for the next segment of making his codes. Looking for Tenki? Elidor asked. He's busy, so I get you today. Heiki will drop by to test your aiming though, so be prepared for that. Izuku had prepared for that, and had been practicing at home. Well, in the backyard, and only while his mom wasn't home, but still. What are you planning on doing? Teaching you to fight. He grinned, and Izuku eyed the cane he used to get around cautiously. Well, my skeletons will be, he amended quickly. They're sturdy enough that unless you slam them against the mat too hard they won't dissolve. So they'll make good sparring partners for a while. Izuku nodded cautiously, and followed the man out into the backyard. Elidor slammed his cane on the ground, and a split opened up, 3 skeletons climbing out of the ground. All right kid, let's go. Izuku was suddenly very glad no one was there to see how useless he was against the skeletons. Izuku was somewhat grateful when Heiki came out to find him. He was pretty sure he'd have bruises on his bruises when they all finally appeared in a few days. At least his mom knew he was clumsy and probably wouldn't question the ones that would show up in places he couldn't hide them. Wow kid, Heiki said as he hit the mat once more. You've only been at this for one afternoon? He's suspiciously good at dodging, Elidor agreed, shaking his head. Not that it's a bad thing, don't get me wrong kid, dodging is a good skill to have, but it is mildly concerning that you're so good at it. Heiki turned to Elidor to talk quietly to him. Izuku caught most of the words, even if he hadn't meant to. He's flinching every time an open hand comes at him, get the skeletons to keep their fists closed, we'll work on the flinching later, after we get Y out of him. Izuku hadn't realized he was doing that. He'd have to try harder. Couldn't show weakness, couldn't give them a reason to baby him. One more time, Elidor said, tapping his cane on the ground. Then Heiki can take you. Izuku gulped quietly and got ready for another round of dodge the skeletons. Try hitting them. Heiki encouraged. Go for the joints, the shoulders, the elbows, the spine, the neck, the knees, although probably not the hip. The pelvis bone is really hard and will probably bruise your hand. Izuku ducked under another hit attempt. And use a flat palm strike. You don't know how to punch yet? Heiki added after a moment. Izuku flattened his hand, ducked under another punch, tried to get around the skeleton, and used the base of his hand to strike the shoulder of the skeleton, throwing it off as it staggered forward. Who? Go kid! Heiki shouted. Izuku felt a warm bubble of pride. He popped it quickly, a perhaps irrational fear of Bakugo finding out coming over him. Elidor tapped his cane on the ground again, and the skeletons crawled back into the crack, the earth sealing up behind them. You can have him, Heiki. He'll already be very sore tomorrow, so we might as well break here. Izuku staggered over to them somewhat unsteadily. Elidor was probably right, he'd be sore tomorrow. Maybe Bakugo would see and not beat him up. Unlikely, but he could hope. We'll let you rest for a while, we should go over weapons maintenance anyway, Heiki said, glancing at the sun. We have an hour, so we're all good. Izuku nodded. He probably couldn't convince them he could continue, and he'd be learning something anyway, so he sat down in the offered chair, Heiki across from him. They moved on to actually throwing weapons after 20 minutes or so. Izuku was rested up fine, and now knew how to take better care of his weapons. No, the weapons he was borrowing. Not his. Not his weapons. Wow, you've improved your aim a lot. Heiki praised. You're hitting more consistently in the outer ring, and almost never miss the pole. It took me almost a year to get this far, you're a fast learner. Well, he practiced it a lot. Mostly on random trees at the park near their house. He hadn't been found yet, so he kept doing it, going when no one was following him, and making sure to hide deep in the forest before practicing. Haiky'll make you a marksman in 2 months at this rate, Elidor said, laughing. Then you'll move on to the fancy stuff. Izuku frowned. Fancy stuff? Heike spun 2 kunai through her fingers, then 2 more slid out of her sleeve and she threw them at the target, each one intercepting another, and somehow they all ended up in the target, despite her not throwing any of them at the target. It's easier to show off in a specific area for it, Heike admitted. But that one's a fun trick for scaring people into thinking my quirk extends to weapons manipulation. It doesn't, but they think it does. Izuku was suitably impressed. He could also see how someone could think that proved her quirk extended to manipulating the weapons. He himself wouldn't have been fooled, but he could see how someone would be. It's all very interesting, but you'll never get to there if you don't practice. We'll keep practicing the rest of the time, if you don't mind. Izuku shook his head quickly. Of course, he didn't mind. Tenki had, admittedly, asked Elidor to watch Izuku so he could go check in on Izuku's home life. Mutko had allowed him to borrow his quirk, body mimicry, to use for this mission. Tenki had gotten enough information from the kid to know how he'd act. The quirk would do the rest. He used the quirk to mimic Izuku from one of the notebooks Tenki had borrowed, and nodded to Mutko who'd been supervising. Remember, there'll be impulses towards how he acts, listen to them and you'll do fine. Tenki nodded to the reformed villain, and walked off. The quirk luckily copied clothing and such as well, so he was ready to go. He'd looked up where Izuku lived with his mother, although didn't seem to need it as the quirk nudged him onto the right path and into the right walking style. If he hadn't had several illusion disguise type quirks before this, he probably would have had more of an issue. As it stood, he fell into the different walking easily. He spotted a group of 3 kids, a blonde one, a large one, and a skinny one. Tenki could sense their quirks. The leader, the blonde one, had an explosive quirk, the large one had a kind of wing quirk, and the skinny one had something to do with elongating his fingers. The quirk pushed him to hunch in further, make himself a smaller target, and Tenki wondered if he needed to murder someone. Suhim the kid was cute. The blonde kid stalked up to him. What are you doing out this late, Dkeu? Sparks popped in his palms, and Tenki suppressed the urge to tell him off for public quirk usage. The quirk nudged him, so he opened his mouth and said whatever came to mind from the quirk. And nothing kaken. Just W wanted to get O out of the house. Tenki was willing to bet this kid was why Izuku had such bad stuttering problems. And what was with the nicknames? Although boy, this was a useful quirk for impersonating people. The boy, Kaken, apparently, narrowed his eyes at Tenki. I don't think I believe you. Why did you have your backpack then? Tenki flinched when the quirk pushed him to do it. I was doing homework. Kaken glared at him for a moment longer, then shed and barked at the other 2. Let's go, extras. Deku's just being useless and probably stalkery as usual. The 3 left with their parting insults, and Tenki felt the strong urge to kill someone. He knew what Dkeu meant, knew what their insults were probably doing to the poor boy's psyche. Briefly, he wondered if they could all take turns taking his place at his school for a couple of weeks while the others kept him busy. Whatever they did, there would be a talk with Izuku about what was going on here. Tenki had wandered to the apartment building where he knew Izuku lived while he was thinking. When he entered the house, it was lit up cheerily. The smell of some sort of food was floating through the air. Izuku, you're home early from meeting your friends. A woman, he assumed it was Izuku's mother, poked her head out of the kitchen. Are you all right? You weren't playing too rough again, were you? Tenki shook his head. He'd stay for a few more minutes, get a sense of how the woman and Izuku interacted, then make his prepared excuse, he forgot a notebook, and leave. Izuku would come home as normal and life would go on. Although the comment about playing too rough was bothering him. I'm just so glad you found some friends. You didn't forget to tell them you're quirkless, did you? We don't need a repeat of what happened with Katsuki. I don't want you hurt because you forgot to tell them you're quirkless. Oh, now he was really concerned. The quirk pushed him to respond, so he did. No, they know. We're mostly just talking, and no playing, are rough or otherwise. Oh, that's good. I don't want you hurt because you thought you were more durable than you actually are because you're quirkless. I'm just worried about you. Tenki made a vague affirmative noise, looking around the house. He spotted a picture of Izuku, the woman, and another man he recognized. Hisashi Midaria, quirk, breathing fire. Tenki paused. Oh, that was where he recognized the name Midaria. Hisashi had been part of the more legal side of what he did, had worked as a sort of accountant that did analysis as a side thing. If Tenki was being honest, Hisashi had done more analysis than accounting. That did explain where Izuku got it from, however, since it clearly didn't come from the woman. He did remember that Hisashi had died when some idiot had attempted to attack where he worked. Hisashi had taken a hit for a new mother and died on the way to the hospital. He stored that to tell Izuku later. His father had been a good man, despite working for the foremost villain in the underground. After a long 10 minutes of Tenki thinking he really should file the woman for child abuse, specifically mental and emotional, he made the excuse and left. He used a different quirk he had on hand to make her forget the entire encounter. It'd be easier on everyone. And spare him from having to tell Izuku. Now, he had things to discuss with the other villains. Izuku didn't know what changed when he got back the next day, and he wasn't sure how to react to it. At first he'd thought that maybe they'd realized he was quirkless and useless, but they weren't treating him any differently on that front. Honestly, if anything, they were going slightly harder on him, leaving him exhausted when fighting practice was over. Tenki was again available, so he spent the last half of his day working on his code a bit more and learning the basics. From a couple different languages. He hadn't been challenged mentally like that in a long time. His head was spinning with all the languages. Tenki clearly found it highly amusing that he ended up attempting to speak in Greek, only to speak in Norse, then trying to speak in Latin, spoke in the ancient Egyptian. Tenki, who was using a polyglot quirk that only did dead languages, wasn't having any issues. You try learning 4 at once, Izuku grouched, pouting as Tenki laughed again at him mixing up the languages, having started his sentence in Greek and ended it in Norse. You asked to learn all 4, Tenki reminded him. Try starting to write your notes in each language. Then it'd end up a horrific mishmash of 4 languages and be unintelligible to everyone but me. It'd be a good code, Tenki pointed out mildly. This quirk only translates verbal things. I'm using a completely different quirk to teach you the writing segments. Start trying to separate the languages, but keep your ability to mash them together unintelligibly. Start with that, and when you can switch between them easily, we'll start coding your mishmash. Alternatively, you could try dropping 1 or 2 of the languages. It'd be easier, although possibly more annoying in the future. I'm not dropping anything, Izuku said firmly. I'll work on it. See how many sentences you can make with the words you know, then read them all aloud when you're done, Tenki agreed. Don't accidentally start writing homework assignments in your mishmash, Izuku blushed. I won't. He couldn't. Kaken would blow a fuse if he thought Izuku thought he was better than he was. Of course, Tenki said mildly, raising an eyebrow. Let's try again. Izuku nodded quickly. Izuku was sure his mom was noticing something, probably that he was now muttering in a mishmash of languages, and was generally happier. Kaken certainly noticed him sneaking away as quickly as he could, avoiding him whenever possible. He'd noticed changes in himself. He was flinching less at Kaken's explosions, better able to evade Kaken and his lackeys, and well, he thought about jumping off a roof less, to be honest. He had friends now, and friends that believed in him, that were helping him be a hero. His stutter was gone around the reformed villains, although it was still there at school, and even there it was starting to go away. I'm proud of your progress, Tenki said one day after Izuku had successfully held a long conversation about various things with him, switching languages in time with Tenki. Izuku beamed. With your code for your notebooks out of the way, Tenki continued, gesturing to where Mastermind, Danbo, was sitting. Danbo has offered to teach you strategy. You'd do well to let him teach you. Izuku nodded quickly. It'd be my honor. The reformed villain's quirk was hyper-intelligence, and he was rumored to have gone up against Nizu repeatedly during his career. Supposedly he'd lost a bet against Nizu, and that was why he'd retired and reformed. Don't tell it to me, Tenki chided gently. Tell him. Izuku blushed, but scrambled up, nearly tripping over his own feet on his way to the sofa. Tenki tell you my offer? Danbo asked, raising an amused eyebrow. Izuku nodded very quickly, then bowed at the waist. I'd be honored to learn from you. Danbo reached out and grabbed a set of papers. Take these, complete them on your own time. I want to see where you are. Do your best to complete each scenario with as few casualties as possible. Izuku nodded somewhat distractedly, looking through the papers. Each one had a very difficult strategy puzzle on them, each detailed what his supplies and men were, plus their skill level, then the supplies and skills of the enemy. Some were missing information on the enemy, some had a map, others didn't, and instead had a description of the surrounding area. It looked pretty fun if Izuku was being honest. But now, Danbo said, interrupting his train of thought. Play Sho-gi with me. Izuku quickly ran back to put the papers on top of his notebooks where they were waiting to be put back in his backpack. He hurried back, sitting down across from Danbo. He knew the basics of how to play, although he was sure he was going to lose. This was going to be a learning experience though, and he'd try harder next time. He did lose, although Danbo went through each move they'd both made, pointing out flaws and good moves, then explaining what his strategy had been, followed by the maneuvers he'd used. My grandfather taught me all of these, Danbo explained, finishing up. And now I will teach these to you. He was the smartest man I knew, although had a powerful shadow-based quirk, not an intelligence-based one. Was your quirk a mutation? Izuku asked curiously. No, it was from my mother. Her and grandfather would play Sho-gi regularly. Apparently, she never won a single round with him. I never did either, actually. Wow, he sounds really smart, especially for not having an intelligence-based quirk, Izuku marveled quietly. Sometimes I wonder if he would have beaten Nizu at his own game, Danbo mused quietly. Unfortunately, it was never tested. Whoa, Izuku muttered, resetting up the board. I think we have time for one more before I have to go? Oh, all right, Danbo said, sighing somewhat exaggeratedly. One more game. Izuku cheered quietly, making his first move. Izuku knew they had a shogi board at home, he'd seen it a few times, and had played his mom a couple times too. He just had to practice some of what he'd learned on her, 'cause she probably wouldn't promptly counter anything he tried. Hey mom, Izuku said as he got home. Can we play shogi? Me and one of my friends were playing it today, and he taught me some things and I want to try them out. Well alright. You can go get it out if you want. I can't promise I'll be a good opponent though. His mom patted his head. And we can't play for too long, I do have to get dinner ready. Izuku nodded dutifully, and hurried to get the board he knew was stashed in the game closet. He briefly wondered what dinner was, and if he could work on his homework from Danbo. After shogi maybe. Izuku grabbed the board, running back into the main room to find his mom. I got it. His mom smiled, patting the center of the table. I hope you remember how to set it up, I'm afraid I only remember what the pieces can do. Izuku quickly set up the board. I remember how to set it up. And don't forget, once you've picked your cover, your personality when the camera is on, you cannot drop it until you're out of the costume, Yggdrasil, or rather, Mokusei, insisted. It could either make the media mad, or just straight up be disastrous. Izuku nodded, writing it down in the notebook he currently had gotten from Tenki as a gift for being fluent in Egyptian. This notebook was only for things he learned while here. Honestly, he wasn't sure who was more surprised he'd managed to become fluent in one of the languages in only a couple of months, him or Tenki. Or maybe the rest of the nursing home's occupants. Me and Kuro had no issues with that, of course, Mokusei boasted. Of course not, Kuro snapped cantankerously. Normally Izuku would hesitate to use such a word, but it really fit here. We acted the same in and out of the suit. Yeah, Izuku could tell, since it seemed like they acted exactly the same, even nearly half a century later. Izuku finished up his summarized version of his summarized notes from today, and snapped the notebook closed. He wasn't actually done. Kuro still wanted to finish up his entire course on what spots in a building to target if you wanted to bring it down, which had been preceded by a 2-week-long lecture on what places to hit to make the most damage. It also doubled as a mild step into the psychology of villains that aimed to make the most damage. Izuku figured it'd help him stop them from doing all that damage later. Don't you close that dang thing yet? Kuro grouched. Ha, so he did get their attention with that. Izuku opened it up again obligingly, turning slightly to face Kuro instead of Mokusei. After this was a test with Heiki, then whether he passed, he'd either have another week of practicing with her, or he'd be moving on to working with Bullseye. Izuku wasn't quite sure what he'd be teaching that was different than Heiki, but he wasn't about to protest more learning. His grades had stayed basically the same, so no one seemed to notice that Izuku was muttering in different languages, or that his notebooks were all in a mishmash of languages. Or that Izuku was getting stronger, slightly less like a bean sprout. Or even that he was disappearing quickly after school to unknown places. Izuku didn't mind, of course. It meant he didn't have to field off unwanted questions. Once Kuro had finished with him, Izuku hurried to put away his notebook and strap on the weapons pouch Heiki had given him so long ago. He pulled on the gloves as well, relishing the slight pressure on his hands. He always liked having pressure on his body, and the gloves did that really well. He'd kind of taken to wearing them more than just when he was practicing just because of how much he liked the pressure. It helped calm him a lot. Heiki was already practicing when he got out there, throwing knife after knife into a target. Every single one hit the target, although that was expected, and Izuku could guarantee each one was hitting exactly where she intended, even if it wasn't the bullseye. "Oh hey kid," Heiki said once she noticed him, which was almost immediately. Her skills hadn't dimmed much, even though she was long retired. "Ready for a test?" Izuku nodded, hoping he didn't look as nervous as he felt. He did. Heiki tactfully didn't mention it. "The test will be simple," Heiki said, tapping the target. "One of Elidir's skeletons will stand in front of this. Your job is to hit every vital point on the skeleton with kunai after making an outline around it with shuriken. If you can't, no problem, we can try again as many times as you need." Izuku nodded, steeling himself and ready to do his best. He had to get this right, had to get it perfect, had to show he was worth teaching more to. He didn't want to give this up now. He didn't think he could without actually taking a swan dive off a roof. He threw his first shuriken, impaling it right next to the skeleton's arm. He didn't know when it had gotten there, but he also didn't care. On and on it went, Izuku impaling shuriken after shuriken into the target around the unflinching skeleton and not missing a thing. He nailed a kunai through the vital points: eyes, throat, heart, kidney, and stomach. "Very good job, kiddo," Heiki praised, inspecting the skeleton after he stopped. Izuku, slightly more used to getting praised, did not burst into tears immediately, although he did start crying quietly. She was just so nice and kind and didn't care he was quirkless, and didn't mind when he started crying. And oh, now he was bawling. She just giggled and handed him a tissue, patting him on the head. "One day I'll manage to successfully compliment you enough that you won't burst into tears every time." "Why, you really don't have to," Izuku sniffled, blowing his nose with the tissue and going to put it in the nearby trash can. "No, I really do, kid," Heiki replied, clapping him on the back. "All right, we'll keep working on accuracy in other situations, but I think you're good to start working with Guy." "Is that what this is about?" Izuku asked, blowing his nose again. "Working with Bullseye too?" "Well, he wanted to teach you too, so we compromised," Heiki explained, pulling one of the kunai out of the target with a grunt. "I got to teach you basic aiming and then all the fancy stuff to make sure you hit the target no matter what, and he gets to teach you all the good places to hit and senbon." "Senbon'll be good for you, kid. Bullseye, well, Guy," Izuku supposed, said while coming up to inspect the target. "You can throw with a fair amount of strength, but senbon are more about accuracy and hitting the target exactly than strength. Senbon also involve a lot of memorization of points on the human body you can hit to make someone go down, then stay down," Heiki agreed. "So we're trying not to overload you with too much work to do. And you can decide not to do something if you want." "No thanks." Izuku squeaked quickly. "I'm glad to be here. And I'm happy to learn anything you'll teach me." "If you insist, kid," Heiki replied, amused. "Just don't burn out. Tell us if you need a break." "Or tell Kuro and Mokusei no," Guy added, laughing. "They're running out of lesson plans you learn so fast." "Sorry," Izuku mumbled sheepishly. No, it's good," Guy was quick to reassure him. "I haven't seen them this excited in a decade or two. It's good for them. They get bored easily when they don't have anything to fight," Heiki said, laughing. Except they're too old to fight anyone physically, so they get antsy. So keep up the good work, kid, Guy said, patting him on the back. We'll get you into UA yet. Izuku blinked at him owlishly. What? Did I ever say I wanted to go to UA? We assumed you'd want to. Heike broke into his mumble stream that was slipping into ancient Egyptian. It's the biggest hero school around. The other hero schools are fine as well if you don't want to go to UA, of course. No! Izuku shouted, shrinking back when they glanced at him in surprise. I mean, yeah, I wanted to go to UA if possible, I just didn't really think it would be possible because I'm quirkless. UA allows quirkless students, does it not? Heike asked, confused. Well, yeah. Izuku had looked that up when he was diagnosed, double-checking to see if he could still be a hero. I think it's the only one that does. I'd have to check, but I think you're correct, Guy said, pulling out his phone, presumably to check. I don't see the issue still. I'm quirkless, Izuku tried to explain futilely. And? Heike asked patiently. Kid, you know what age we're from, right? We were all active before All Might even entered high school, maybe even before he was born. The age we grew up in had a far higher quirkless percentage than your generation. What Heike is trying to say is that we don't have the same biases your generation and the one above you has. Quirkless to us never meant useless, it always just meant different, Guy explained. Quirkless have their own strengths and weaknesses, just like any quirked person. Plus, without a quirk you aren't held back by a fake attachment to the idea that anything can be solved with your quirk. Izuku knew what they were trying to say, but he was having some difficulty accepting it after he'd spent almost his entire life being reminded at every corner that quirkless meant useless. It's all right, fledgling, Heike said after a moment. We'll let you process later. For now, why don't we start some variation drills? People won't always stand still and let you hit them, or let you throw one kunai to determine distance and elevation then throw a second one to hit them. They won't always let you stand there to throw stuff at them either, unless they're supremely stupid, Guy added. Although you'll have a better chance at them doing that if you make them underestimate you because you're quirkless. Make them underestimate you and then utterly destroy them, Heike said, grinning viciously. Slice open their guts and make them watch their own organs spill out of their body as punishment for underestimating you. Izuku took a wary step away from her and she pouted. I'm not slicing anyone's stomachs open, he replied, inching away from her slowly. Fine, she huffed. Just make them regret it and make them think about their crimes in prison then. Maybe cripple them for life or something. And teaching you to do that will be my job, Guy said, grinning. But Heike can have you for today. I'll keep you for the rest of the week. Okay, Izuku agreed quickly. Izuku understood the reason behind all the memorization and all the really weird drills Heike was now having him doing, but that didn't mean he liked them all that much. For example, she'd have him hiding in a tree while skeletons roamed the area and he had to hit all of them, whether in the neck or the head to disable them. Arms and legs were also options to hit them. That of course only disabled them, but it slowed them down and let Izuku hit them easier. Sometimes the villains themselves joined in the fun, covered securely in a thick plating Tenki had gotten from somewhere that protected them against the kunai Izuku threw. It was really just Shadow Dancer and Hitugi roaming around, although sometimes Tenki and Puppeteer joined them. They were harder to hit than the skeletons, hiding themselves and generally using their quirks to throw Izuku off. Tenki usually picked a single quirk out of his many stored ones and only used it, which was sort of convenient for Izuku, but not really because he kept picking supremely annoying ones. Whatever happened, that was one of the easier drills. The harder drills included trying to hit a target while Heike was standing behind it and throwing dulled weapons at him, trying to hit a target while laying down, the speed drills, and the Sinban drills he had, which were always an adventure. Sinban were long durable needles. Essentially, they were wickedly sharp on both ends and very dangerous. A more accurate human-looking target had been set up so Izuku could practice hitting the points he was memorizing. All of them were various pressure points that could shut down entire limbs if Izuku hit them right. He just had to remember exactly where they were, and figure it out for other body types, and actually hit the point correctly. It was a lot, but Izuku knew it was making him better. He'd started trying to mentally point out pressure points on other people, and once managed to nail Bakugo in the one that shut down his entire arm with a pencil once. He hadn't really meant to. He just had the pencil in his hand, and had been thinking about pressure points and how to throw Sunbon. Then Bakugo turned around, tried to blow up his face, and Izuku threw the pencil on instinct. Bakugo's entire arm immediately went completely limp, and he stared at it in utter confusion. It had been the end of school, so Izuku took the chance he had, grabbed his pencil, backpack and notebook, and got the heck out of there as fast as his legs would carry him. "You're early," Jin noted as he ran in, out of breath. "Anything happen?" Izuku fiddled with the pencil. The tip was broken where it had hit Bakugo's arm. "I might have thrown a pencil at Bakugo and hit him in the arm pressure point and shut down his entire arm." Jin started cackling loudly, and Izuku wilted. "I didn't mean to," he cried. "It was an accident." "A good use of the skills I have taught you," Guy decided, grinning proudly. "Good job, kid. Now say it with me, Bakugo deserved that stab." "I'm not saying that," Izuku said quickly, shaking his head. "I shouldn't have done it. It's up to me to keep the situation from escalating, and now look what I did." "Kid, it will never be the victim's job to keep their abuser from escalating the situation," Jin said sternly. "You did good hitting him in the arm. Do it again tomorrow to the other arm and see if he crosses you again." "He'd just go after me again," Izuku disagreed. "I couldn't possibly be better than Bakugo." "In my expert opinion," Guy, who hadn't ever met Bakugo, said, raising a hand. "You're way better than the BSRD ever will be." "I'm really not, Izuku." "And you've never met Bakugo, how would you know?" "Doesn't matter if I've met him, he sounds like a douchebag," Guy scoffed. "When you're less stuck doing endless drills when not being taught by Kuro and Mokusei remind me to start getting your speed up, you're going to need it," Jin said, shaking his head. "I teleport sure, but I'm fast without my quirk too. Fastest here even now." "You're one of the youngest villains in this place," Guy huffed. "Of course you would be faster." "Well, either way, I was fast in my time, and I still know how to get there, so we'll get you up to speed." Jin giggled at his own joke, and Izuku nervously laughed along, still on edge from encountering Bakugo. "I'd still get in trouble for fighting him," Izuku added quickly. "Even if he started it." "I call BS, Jin shouted, slamming his hand down on the couch. It wasn't very imposing since the couch swallowed any thump he would have made. "Someone go kill their administration." "Yeah, but that would shut down the school," Guy said reasonably. "The only other school in this area is an expensive private school." "Sorry, kid, but I doubt your family could afford that." Izuku nodded sheepishly. He was right, his mom probably would have put him in the private school since it was safer, but they couldn't afford it on a single mother's salary, especially since she only worked while he wasn't in the house. So, while he was at school or the nursing home. He didn't really know why that was, but he supposed it didn't really matter. There was food on the table and they weren't super short on anything. "Gah, fine, I won't attempt murder," Jin huffed, folding his arms petulantly. Izuku had learned that word today and he thought it fit Jin rather quite well. "If you attempted murder you would succeed at murder," Guy pointed out logically. "The same goes for any of us here." Izuku would probably be more concerned if he wasn't fully aware every non-staff person here was a retired supervillain. Bakugo was slightly more wary of him when he went back to school the next day, glaring at him suspiciously all day, although no teachers told him off, or even seemed to notice, so Izuku hoped to high heaven he was in the clear. Bakugo didn't steal his lunch, didn't corner and harass him, didn't even try and blow up his notebooks again. Izuku was almost creeped out by how easily he got through the day. It continued to the next, then another day, and every day for another 2 weeks. Izuku was thoroughly weirded out but kind of grateful for it. Not having to evade Bakugo and getting to eat his lunch every day was showing good results. He had more energy from the extra calories, and had more energy to run around with the retired villains because he wasn't using it evading Bakugo. It was pretty nice, not being bullied for once in his life. The ignoring finished up by Bakugo cornering him after school with 4 other lackeys. Izuku, who'd just gotten out of detention for the 10th time this week, for lunch, 2 before school, and 4 others after school, the teachers were going overboard, was mostly defenseless. His backpack had mysteriously gained a hole in it sometime yesterday, so he had been carrying the few papers and books he needed around himself. So he was mostly defenseless if he wanted to preserve the few papers he did have that hadn't yet gotten destroyed. The teachers had been feeling vindictive these 2 weeks, and Izuku suspected they were just waiting for another slip-up like what happened with the pencil. So he did his best not to give them one, keeping his head down and doing his work, and avoiding thinking about sunban and pressure points. So here he was anyway, cornered and without his usual weapons pouch, and no pencils since someone had stepped on them and broken them all, probably with some quirk use. Now that Izuku thought about it, that had probably been on purpose. Intentionally making sure he couldn't use them as unintentional weapons like he had 2 weeks ago. Since Izuku left the holster in his backpack, not willing to actually carry around weapons in plain sight, he had nothing on him. Or did he? Well, he definitely didn't, but maybe he could borrow something off the others. Gen did show him the basics of pickpocketing a week or so ago. Bakugo was finishing up his rant, it looked like, something about how he shouldn't overstep his place in the world, and he was just a useless Dkeu. Izuku didn't really pay attention. You should be grateful you're even alive. Bakugo shouted, apparently culminating his rant by running forward in an attempt to blow Izuku's face up. Izuku, too conditioned towards dodging everything, ducked under him, snuck a hand in and out of Bakugo's backpack pocket and came up with 4 pencils. Plenty for his purposes. 1 per person. And he could always pick them back up. Okay, that one had wings, so a good place to hit would be right between them to paralyze both of them. Then he had a finger quirk, so 2 shoulder hits would take him out nicely, same for Bakugo and explosions, and he actually didn't know the last guy, so it was safest to hit the pressure point for knocking him the frick out. 1 pencil for the wings guy, 2 for finger, scoop back up 1 for the finger guy while he threw one of Bakugo's, then throw the other. Pick up the other pencil like he was going to throw it at the 4th guy. Then deck him in the face. In Izuku's defense, it was the easiest way to knock him out quickly and cleanly. With that finished, Izuku dropped the stolen pencils and booked it, running away from the 3 panicking bullies and the 1 unconscious one. He was so going to get expelled for this. It wasn't one of his volunteer days, but he appeared there enough on his off days that he was pretty much acknowledged as a regular around the home. Honestly, the last time Izuku had gone home right after school was like 2 months ago, so. Izuku, Tenki greeted politely as Izuku entered, still clutching his books to his chest and breathing slightly heavily. Did something happen? Now that Izuku had a chance to slow down and breath, it all caught up. He burst into tears. I hit Kaken and 2 others and now they'll really hate me, and I punched one except he's out cold and the school's going to expel me and the teachers'll hate me and I'll never get into UA and never be a hero because I had to leave the only school mom could afford and dash. I'm going to cut you off there, kid, Tenki said calmly, handing him a tissue that came from who knows where. Izuku sniffled, using the tissue to blow his nose and wipe off his face a bit. Tenki handed him a whole pack and the nearby garbage can. Once Izuku had calmed down and stopped crying, Tenki waited a moment longer, then asked, "What happened?" "I got cornered by Kaken and 3 other people after detention after school and hit Kaken and 2 others with borrowed pencils to eliminate their quirks from the equation, and punched the 4th guy to knock him out 'cause I didn't know his quirk. Then I ran to here." "Good job," Tenki praised easily. "You assessed the threat, dealt with it, and escaped. You did well." Izuku really should have expected this reaction, but was still caught off guard. "Oh, did the squirt actually fight someone?" Gen asked, coming into the room. "Nice. Good job, kid." "I didn't want to." Izuku protested. "They were going to beat me up." "Kid, what did you think being a hero involved?" Tenki asked amusedly. "It means beating up villains." "I know, but they're kids and I'm a kid," Izuku said, looking down. "Shouldn't have to deal with this yet, we're just kids." Gen sniffled dramatically. "Our lit Izuku is growing up. He's learned that this is unfair and shouldn't be happening." "That's a good thing to realize," Tenki said softly. "You are all just children. And in the end, Bakugo is a child that was taught very wrong. Really, both of you were taught wrong. He was taught that there were no consequences to his actions. You were taught that you were lesser and everything you did was wrong. Both are incorrect, and both are unhealthy." What really ought to happen is that he doesn't get into UA. Unfortunately, I don't think that'll happen, so what you can do is when you both hit UA, tell the teachers. They'll listen and understand. Bakugo is a child that needs a reality check. Gen considered it for a moment. And therapy. Mostly therapy. Both of you need therapy, Tenki scoffed. But we're doing the best we can. In the meantime, while we wait for any repercussions, why don't we talk about something I've been considering bringing up for a while? What is it? Izuku ventured, still reeling a bit from their reactions. Homeschooling. Or nursing homeschooling, Jin disagreed. But yeah, close enough. I've been alive long enough to collect at least one teaching degree and go through several courses for various subjects. I believe I could teach you better than the school is. You are a brilliant young man, and I believe it could only benefit you to spend more time here instead of at your home or your current school. I'd have to ask my mom, but what would I tell her? I just tell her you're my friends, not anything about this being a job at a nursing home. I didn't want to say since she's so happy I have friends now. Izuku chewed anxiously on his lip. Then say your friends are part of a homeschool group they invited you to join, Jin suggested, grinning somewhat cheekily. She wouldn't have to do anything since we already have all the teachers we need, and we could get her one of our phone numbers as a pretend contact and go from there. An actually good suggestion, Tenki remarked dryly. Amazing! Jin gasped overdramatically. How could you? Sarcasm, in this house? Izuku snickered at them. Maybe it'd be okay. So Bakugo got suspended for a week with nothing on his permanent record, and Izuku got expelled for causing undue trouble, and being a trouble in class and having bad classwork. His mom was, as expected, very concerned about this, but Izuku reassured her with the homeschooling lie and gave her Tenki's phone number. They had collectively decided Tenki was the most adultiest adult among them, and so he would be the primary teacher for the imaginary homeschool group. The other pretend teachers of the school were Danbo, Haiki, Ninjiomi, Kurai, and Denryu. Izuku was not at all surprised that most of the teachers were female. Everyone else got to be the pretend students. Kuro wasn't particularly pleased about it, but Izuku pointed out that if he said he and Mokusei got in another fight, it'd be more believable with students than teachers. Kuro had to agree with the flawless logic. So Izuku transitioned seamlessly to spending a good 85% of his time at the home, generally only coming home for dinner, sleeping, and breakfast. He liked this better honestly, it was way more fun than school, and he was learning so much more. Okay, so your entrance exam for UA is in a year and a half, right? Jin said immediately as Izuku wandered in. Yes. Izuku said hesitantly. Why? Well, it's about time we started you on getting faster. Jin said cheerfully. It'll only help, and sure you won't be as fast as me because I'm super fast even without my quirk, but you can totally be faster than most villains. Okay. Izuku offered. How are we going to do that? Prepare to be supremely sore. Jin said instead, grinning almost evilly. Izuku paled slightly. Training with Jin took up almost all of his time, and while he wasn't doing that, Haiki still made him practice with her, and he was still learning under Tenki. It was exhausting and Izuku loved it. Funnily enough, his mother didn't even seem to notice his spike in appetite. He also really only ate with her maybe once a week, so it might have been that. However, since Izuku was more observant than his mother, he did notice the lack of nursing home employees after a week or two. So what's up with the decreased number of employees? Izuku asked Tenki one time while they were discussing potential uses of one of the quirks Tenki had. HM? Oh, since you're here all the time, they were encouraged to downsize a bit, Tenki replied. They're all mostly a farce anyway, we can all take care of ourselves fine. We're all in excellent health. So Ninjiomi and you brainwashed them into getting rid of most employees, Izuku said, reading between the lines like a pro. Maybe, Tenki said vaguely. Izuku took that as a yes. And the remaining ones might mostly work for me in one vague way or another. Izuku couldn't bring himself to be surprised. Alright, sounds fun. Fortunately, Izuku could tell when he was getting better and faster. He was keeping up with Jin better, and he was less and less tired at the end of the day. Hey Jin. Izuku asked at some point after a set of running exercises. "Yeah, kid. Why do you always have that crow stuffy?" Zhen paused, staring off into middle distance. "It was a gift from a friend." And that was that. Izuku was still curious, but he acknowledged that Zhen didn't want to talk about it and didn't press further. Zhen started talking about it unprompted a few days later. His name was Itachi. I guess you could kind of say we were cousins. Not actually related, too close to be just friends, but not quite brothers. Cousins fit us just fine. He had a cute little brother too that he adored, although the kid absolutely hated me. Zhen snorted quietly. Never did find out why he hated me so much. Izuku stayed quiet, eagerly listening. One day, something changed. Zhen gave a heavy sigh and leaned forward to put his head in his hands. He suddenly looked his age, old and weathered, none of the vibrant energy he usually had. I don't know what it was, but something did. I ignored it when I shouldn't have. A week later he and his entire family were dead. Even his beloved younger brother. It was ruled that Itachi killed all three of them then committed suicide. Zhen stopped, his body racked with something, a shiver, a sob. Izuku couldn't tell. I should have said something, he whispered at last. I should have said, should have done something. Sometimes I wonder if it's my fault they're all dead. Izuku hummed, considering. Didn't you tell me a while ago that it's not my fault that Bakugo hurts other people? Not my responsibility. Jin gave a hoarse laugh, leaning back and grabbing one of the tissues from the box on the table in front of them. Using my own words against me now, are we? You're right, of course. But sometimes I can't help but wonder. Still not your fault, Izuku repeated, smiling kindly at him. Yeah. Thanks, kid. The crow stuffed animal was the thing he gave to me anytime something happened. I have dozens of them in my room, everyone is lab-led with when he gave it to me and what happened. Some were for birthdays, others for holidays, some from festivals, some from stores on his way home. Jin gave a bitter laugh. That was the reason I turned to villainy, to figure out what happened to him, what drove him to that. Did you ever find it? Izuku asked, tilting his head. Zhen wiped at his eyes with another tissue as he answered. No, I never did. I kind of gave up after a while, was only in it for the thrills of getting away from hero after hero. I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life after a while and I put the costume away, got an actual job, and disappeared into the ether. When I got older I found this place and figured why not. I had been a villain for a good few years, I was technically reformed, even if I reformed myself. I'm glad you're here, Izuku told him sincerely. I know you are, kid. I'm glad to be here too. I think it's been good for me so I don't wallow in the past. Zhen stood up, throwing away the tissues he'd used. All right, kid, let's get back to work. You have a hero exam to take in just over a year. You'll need to be as ready as you can be. I'll probably be more ready than everyone there, Izuku said, grinning. The most readiest? Readiest isn't a word, Zhen complained. And? Izuku asked cheekily. Zhen huffed. Get to running, silly kid. I'm coming. Izuku chirped. Are crows your favorite animal? Izuku asked one day when he'd been thinking about it. Sure. I don't really have one, but yeah, crows have always been pretty special to me and not just because of Itachi. Zhen shrugged. There were a lot in my hometown and I liked to feed them. They liked me a lot and even defended me from bullies a few times. That's really cool, Izuku decided, nodding. Maybe he would get Zhen a different style of crow. Or make him one or something. It'd be super cool either way. He ended up finding one he hadn't seen Zhen with before, telling his mom it was one of his friends' birthdays soon and he had to get it for them. His mom was delighted about it and helped him wrap it carefully and sent him off with it the next day. When he presented it to Zhen, the man started crying. He bent and hugged Izuku tightly. Thank you, kid. I love it. Izuku hugged him back just as tight. I'm glad. I spent super long finding just the right one you didn't have. Anything would have been special from you, kid, Zhen replied, releasing him. Thank you. You're welcome. During another aiming exercise, while Izuku was hiding in a tree and trying to find Kyle, which was a hilariously English name that still made Izuku want to laugh when he thought of it. He was also very good at hiding. which led to Izuku's problem. Sometimes he could pick up the little clicks Kyle made to echolocate because his quirk was stupidly cool, but he could never trace them to where Kyle actually was. "You need better triangulation, pup," Kyle said, startling Izuku, who hadn't heard him coming up behind him. Izuku jumped in surprise, almost falling right out of the tree, only to be caught by Kyle's wings. "Careful there, pup," he admonished. "Don't fall out of the tree." "You scared me," Izuku pouted. "I would apologize, but I'm not sorry. You need better triangulation. I made plenty of noise." "I can't hear you all the time," Izuku huffed. "I only hear the clicks sometimes." Kyle paused. "Pup, how much noise do people make when they move?" Izuku stared at him. Why was he asking? None? Why would they make noise? People never made noise when they walked. "Okay, you're going in for Tenki to get your hearing checked," Kyle decided, swinging down out of the tree, adjusting Izuku so he was being held up like a naughty cat and using his wings to get down. "People make loads of noise when they walk, stepping makes noise, clothes rustling makes noise, all sorts of things. That does explain why we can sneak up on you without any effort." "You aren't kidding me, and that isn't just part of your echolocation?" "Nope. Any of the others can tell you the same thing." Heike materialized out of the trees at Kyle's side. "What's going on?" "He can't hear when we sneak up on him at all," Kyle explained. "He thinks people don't make noise when they walk." "Because they don't?" Izuku said, shaking his head in bewilderment. "People never make noise when they walk." "Oh, that's a problem," Heike said. Apparently, there was something Izuku was missing. He was paraded into where Tenki was sitting out of this round of, "Can Izuku find and hit everyone?" "Did the game stop?" Tenki asked, clearly amused. Kyle set Izuku down on the table in front of Tenki. "Check his hearing." Tenki gave them all an equally weird look. "Okay? Izuku, I'm going to use the diagnostic quirk. You're familiar with it." "I definitely haven't forgotten it," Izuku agreed, offering his hand. Tenki took it, closing his eyes to concentrate. "His hearing, you said?" Tenki asked, frowning. "Did you find something?" Kyle asked eagerly. "Unfortunately. Mild hearing damage. It's really weirdly done though. Only certain sounds and frequencies are blocked out and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to them." "Can you fix it?" Izuku asked, wondering just how many sounds he'd missed because of this. "Probably. Give me a second to identify every frequency." "I do click at a couple different frequencies depending on the area," Kyle agreed. "He must not be able to hear all of them." "That is a really weird thing to have damaged," Heike said, considering it. "Tenki, do you know the frequencies of common explosions? It could be the fault of the explosive boy. Although the damage patterns are a bit wrong." "Who knows?" Tenki admitted. "That is one thing I don't know." "All right, Izuku, self-repairing quirk will make you more tired for a few hours. Outside healing will leave you less tired than the regeneration quirk." "We're pretty much done for the day, kid. You can take a nap," Heike said when he glanced at her. "We were going to give you this afternoon off anyway." "Regeneration then," Izuku informed Tenki. He'd rather not make Tenki use the other healing quirk since it'd tire him out. "All right." Tenki's hand glowed a soft green as the quirk transferred. Sounds started fading in, the clink of metal as Heike moved, along with swishing of fabric. Wow, he really had missed a lot of sounds. His bafflement must have shown on his face, because Heike started laughing. "Wow, kid, you must have really been half deaf in all the weirdest ways. Can you guys always hear people in other rooms?" Izuku asked instead, screwing up his face because he could in fact hear Mokusei and Kuro in the other room debating who'd won their recent round of chess. "Most people can, yes," Tenki agreed, taking the quirk back and double-checking with the diagnostic quirk. "All right, that got everything. You're free to go take a nap and wonder about your far better hearing." "Amazing," Izuku marveled quietly, tilting his head this way and that to better hear things going on. He was tired though. "When you wake up I'm teaching you how to actually triangulate someone's position from the sounds," Kyle said, patting his head. "Nap." "Snack then nap," Tenki disagreed. "He needs fuel as well as rest." Heike, who had eternal pockets, pulled 2 granola bars out of nowhere and handed them to Izuku. Here you go, kid. Izuku blinked tiredly at them for a second, then started opening them. Yeah, nap sounded good. Food the nap. Then wake up and more learning. More learning with a recently wildly improved sense. Who knew he was missing this much hearing? Now that Izuku could actually hear, he was amazed at just how much sound he'd missed, and just how loud everything actually was. He actually needed earmuffs or earbuds to go outside for a while because of how loud things were. He was working on getting used to it. His mom didn't seem to notice anything, which was normal at this point. She rarely noticed anything he did these days, which was a bit odd after having to desperately hide the marks left behind by Kaken. Now he could probably walk right past her with a massive burn on the right side of his face and she wouldn't even flinch. A weird thought, but probably true. He just had to be able to sort through all of it, which he was working on with Kyle. Along with that, and partially to help it, there were games of hide and seek. Hitsugi with his hidden in plain sight quirk was a master at it, but he was working on teaching Izuku how to hide in plain sight even without a quirk. To blend in and not be noticed. It'd work well when Izuku started work as an underground hero and was able to hide in the shadows and not be noticed by villains while he came up with a plan. Part of it was acting like he belonged there and was doing something, or on his way to do something. It didn't work quite as well on the retired villains who knew him, but Hitsugi also helped him learn to figure out what places could work as hiding places and what wouldn't do. Places he could squish himself in but other people might not be able to. Izuku was sad for a little bit he couldn't test this out against Kaken, but he figured he could manage just playing hide and seek with his friends. They usually won though, but playing sardines was really funny with them, since the first person had to pick a place everyone could conceivably fit, and could actually get to. Once Izuku had managed to adjust to the fixed hearing well enough, Kyle brought out a BLNDFLD and like that Izuku had to focus even harder on his hearing to get around and find everyone. It was like playing Marco Polo but not in a pool. Mostly since the place didn't have a pool and it'd be weird for everyone to go to a pool. Izuku was slightly suspicious of Tenki's look when they noted they were playing the land version of Marco Polo because of the lack of a pool. Izuku's suspicions were confirmed when he came in one day and found a very innocent-looking Tenki and everyone else surrounding the new pool in its designated room, which didn't exist before. I called it, Jin said when Izuku got there. I totally called it. I'm going to assume he did it with a quirk or two, Izuku guessed. There wasn't really a way he could have done it in one night otherwise. He does have a lot of seemingly random quirks, so I'm not as surprised as I maybe should be. Heike agreed. Well, we'd better find some swimsuits if we're going to use it for some actual Marco Polo. Do they even make old people swimsuits? Sun asked curiously. Pretty sure there aren't designated old people swimsuits, Guy said dryly. Yeah, there are just regular swimsuits, Izuku agreed. Do we just go to the nearest store? That is usually how you find swimsuits, Heike said, nodding. We'd better go in 2 groups though. So it's not so weird. Izuku, you can pick whoever to go with. Unless you have one and would like to go home to get it. Honestly, Izuku hadn't gone swimming in forever, and he was a lot more muscular now, so his old one probably wouldn't fit. It probably wouldn't fit, he admitted somewhat sheepishly. I haven't gone swimming in ages. That's fair, Sun said, bobbing her head. So to the store it was. Not a single worker there looked even vaguely interested, although they got plenty of attention from the shoppers themselves. It was really busy for some odd reason, so the workers were probably just too tired to care. Fortunately for them, it was in fact late spring at the moment, so there were swimsuits. Izuku found some funny shorts that were covered in broccoli and got them after Heike compared the broccoli itself to his fluffy hair. She wasn't at all wrong, which made it even funnier. Tenki was going with both groups to pay for the swimsuits, and had somehow changed his appearance a bit to appear like 30 years younger and took on the uniform that had been for the workers of the center. If anyone did ask, Tenki or Izuku usually replied that they were going to go to the pool soon and needed to be prepared, especially with the onset of summer. It was a reasonable excuse and also shut anyone else up. Who were they to judge some old people who just wanted to have some fun? Marco Polo in the pool was easier, since people made noise as they moved through the water, and also Izuku didn't have to fret about if he tripped over something or stepped into a hole. The benefits of being in water. It did also mean he didn't have to worry about running into a tree, which he had done several times. On the plus side, now he could just jump into the pool if he was really hot after doing the running exercises with Shen. They were reduced slightly though to give some way for Elidar's continued fight training, but the battlegrounds had extended to the whole forest and now he could use whatever. Conchu joined him more often than not, using his quirk and the bugs in his body to point out how he could use the area to his advantage. Getting the drop on the skeletons, making them trip and stumble over unseen holes, straight up laying traps to capture them. It was awesome, and Izuku was so happy. Once Kyle and Conchu had mostly taught him what they could, he was passed off to Ninjaomi and Mutko, who were kind of working together to do their things they had to teach him. Mutko's quirk was awesome, allowing him to take an object belonging to someone else and use it to mimic them physically and in actions. It was just so cool. Ninjaomi's quirk was even cooler, letting her brainwash someone when she made 3 seconds of eye contact. They obviously had abilities outside of that, which made it even cooler. So, kid, I assume you know the quirk singularity theory? Ninjaomi asked one day. Yeah. Izuku had heard of it, of course. It was a very common theory now. Basically, the theory said that eventually quirks would get so powerful they'd hit a singularity. The quirks would become too powerful for those who wield them. She was one of the people who worked on that theory, Mutko said when she hesitated too long. I did little more than function as a lab assistant. I was still a reformed villain after all, Ninjaomi admitted sheepishly. But I did learn a lot about it and how we got to that theory. How was it brought up? Izuku asked curiously. He'd wondered about it, since he wasn't sure how they would test that. With mice? Ninjaomi said, smiling. We got a couple quirked mice and started breeding them. The quirks got more and more powerful until all we could get were stillborn mice because their quirks overwhelmed their bodies and they died in the womb. I didn't really tell anyone this, but I realized after working with the mice that each of their quirks had a power cap. All quirks have a certain point where they either evolve and go in a different direction, or they just stop growing. I realized after seeing 2 mice from the same line with almost the same quirk, but the younger one had higher power levels to start with. Even after training the older mouse, the younger ones still surpassed them in every way possible. I think the same applies to humans. I hit my power cap long ago when I finally got my power activation down to 3 seconds. My son didn't have a quirk at all similar to mine. He got his quirk from his father's side, so there was no real way to test it. What happened to him? Izuku asked curiously. Is he still around? Ninjaomi's lips pulled back from her teeth in a sneer or maybe a snarl. He got married, had a kid with a similar quirk to mine, abandoned the kid to the foster system after making sure I couldn't get custody and left. She sighed deeply. I don't even know the kid's name. He should have my last name though, since my son didn't take his wife's name. Maybe we can find him someday, Izuku said, trying to cheer her up. Then you can get custody. Kid, I'm not exactly young. I'm not sure me taking custody of him would be the best option. As someone who lived in the foster care, it'll be better for him if you took custody, Mutko added, shaking his head. If his quirk is like yours, who knows what could happen? No one would let me even touch their stuff for fear I'd mimic them and do something. Maybe, she replied, obviously unconvinced. Maybe we can try really hard to find him when he gets to high school. Izuku offered. Do you know about how old he is? He's probably about your age now, Ninjaomi said after a long moment. Or somewhat close. Then when I go to high school dash. When you get into UA, Mutko interrupted. When I go to high school, Izuku said slightly more aggressively. We can ask Tenki to look around for him and maybe find him, and since he might also be in high school it'd be easier for you to get custody, right? A bit, I suppose. But I live here, it's not exactly a good place for a teen to live, Ninjaomi said, looking around. You still go back to your home most nights? Then we can find you an apartment nearby or something. Izuku said, already planning. We have time until I get into high school, so it's not inconceivable. I don't know, I'd have to think about it. We have time, Izuku repeated, smiling. What were we doing today? Izuku mostly didn't see the apartment stuff, since he was kind of really busy, But he did maybe burst into tears when Ninjaomi handed him a key to the apartment so he could come in if he wanted to. Just a little bit. The apartment ended up sporadically decorated as everyone pitched in to try and decorate, so the living room was like a collision of Heiki's need to decorate with weapons, for easy access to them obviously, Zhen's desire for soft fluffy things on every surface and at least one crow-patterned thing, Elidir's calm proper ability to decorate things and remember important stuff like official furniture that wasn't a giant beanbag. Needless to say, all of the rooms except Ninjaomi's bedroom looked like someone had taken every style of decorating they could, added the reformed villain's personality quirks, blended it together, then went about splashing it everywhere with no restraint. Izuku thought it was equal parts hilarious and kind of ridiculous. We're so going to have to take down those weapons should there be an inspector coming through here, Ninjaomi sighed, staring at the katana on the wall and the kunai flanking it. Hide them in a closet maybe, Izuku suggested, snuggled on the beanbag in a fluffy blanket. The crow-patterned one Zhen had insisted be in here. I feel like they'd check the closets, Ninjaomi pointed out. As much as I taught you about lying, I cannot lie my way out of having a katana and various other weapons in my closet. I guess you're right, Izuku hummed. Hide them with everyone else. Let Heiki have them back for a bit maybe. They can be put back up afterward. What would my grandson even think of this decorating mess? Ninjaomi despaired. You're the one who let everyone at the place, Izuku pointed out. You brought this one on yourself. Maybe I did a little bit. Doesn't mean I can't despair about what my grandson is going to think of this mess. It was a rare occurrence, even with the villains, that Izuku remembered to bother celebrating his birthday, mostly since no one had for almost a decade. Apparently, the villains disagreed with this, as they'd gotten a bit huffy when he'd forgotten to tell them his birthday passed until 2 months after the fact. And thus his birthday was written down on the communal calendar, and Izuku tried to prepare himself for the inevitable party. When he was banished from the center and backyard to go grocery shopping with Ninjaomi, that solidified that they were doing a party. Izuku didn't really want a party, but it seemed he was getting one anyway. And thus, here he was, carrying most of the bags for Ninjaomi, while she tried to think of an excuse for them not to go back yet since groceries had taken less time than he was pretty sure they'd planned. Izuku decided to take pity on her. Dinner's still a while off, but I'm kind of hungry. Ninjaomi looked mildly relieved. That's because you didn't eat much lunch. Let's get these to the car and then we can find somewhere that sounds good. By the time they did get back to the center, it was late afternoon. The front room was suspiciously quiet, as was the pool room, which left the backyard as the final birthday party place. Surprise! Everyone shouted once he entered the backyard. Happy birthday! You really didn't have to, he said, grinning so broadly it felt like his cheeks were going to split open even as he teared up. Gosh, he loved them so much. His biological mother hadn't even acknowledged his existence this morning, and they'd thrown a surprise party. Oh no kid, we really did, Heiki replied, offering him a tissue. He was slightly less prone to crying at them praising him or other random things, but it still happened with enough frequency that everyone still had tissues on them. Trust me, we did. We weren't about to pass up a chance to spoil you like you deserve, Zhen added, grinning mischievously. Izuku was probably bright red right now in addition to the fresh wave of tears. How else was he supposed to react to this, the first celebrated birthday he'd had in years? Oh kid, Heiki sighed, offering him another tissue. When he'd wiped his face a little bit, she pulled him into a hug. We'll start when you're ready. It took him a few minutes to stop crying and calm down enough for them to continue, but no one seemed to mind. They'd probably planned for it. The thought made Izuku laugh a bit, although he was still sniffling. So, what first? Sun asked, grinning. We found a piñata, some weird party games, cake, snacks, and of course, presents. You really didn't have to, Izuku said, blowing his nose right after. Like we said before, yes we did kid, Zhen disagreed. So, what first? Piñata, Izuku decided. He'd never had the chance to use a piñata. He wanted to try. We found a quirk-resistant one, so hit it as hard as you want. Theoretically, it should be strong enough to endure a whack from at least most of us, Kurai said proudly, brandishing a bat at Izuku. He must have gotten the piñata. Or been in charge of it. Izuku giggled, taking the bat. I wish the piñata luck. It'll need it, Sun said, laughing. Izuku took a breath, held it for a second, then swung the bat at the piñata. It connected, and the piñata swung wildly. Izuku timed his second hit for maximum efficiency, swinging just as the piñata swung back towards the bat, letting the two collide in the middle for maximum effect. It didn't damage the piñata yet, but since it was quirk-resistant and more durable than normal piñatas meant it wouldn't take visible damage for a while. Whose turn next? Izuku asked, reaching out to stabilize the piñata. I'll go, Zhen said cheerfully, hopping up and reaching for the bat. Izuku handed it over, then stepped back out of range. The piñata did not go down easily, but eventually, it split open, spilling out tiny toys. We figured we didn't need to spend the next 2 weeks eating through candy that's bad for us, Kurai explained at Izuku's very confused glance. So we convinced Tenki to make a bunch of tiny toys off some ones we'd found. Easy duplication. These ones chirp, Sun said cheerfully, picking up a little chick and holding it in her hand. It did indeed start chirping merrily. I swear if I hear those at all times of the day I will destroy them all, Danbo threatened, picking up a slinky. Don't worry, it's not the only noise-making one. Zhuan chirped with a slightly malicious grin on his face. Izuku covered his ears, as did Kyle, and it seemed they were right to do it, because Zhen picked up a stuffed bunny, pulled on its arms and shot it like it was a slingshot. It started screaming as he pulled its arms back, and continued after he'd shot it off towards a tree. How did that even get into the running? Heike asked, picking up the other two monkeys sitting on the ground before Zhen could get to them. I vote destroy them. Seconded, Kyle said immediately. Thirded. Izuku added quickly. Duck. Mokusei said, and Izuku did immediately, watching a bouncy ball fly right over his head to hit Kuro in the back. Mokusei. Kuro growled, turning around slowly. That had better not have been you. It was, Denryu said, apparently uncaring of Mokusei's squawk of offense at her betrayal. So, presents? Presents while Kuro tries to kill Mokusei, yes. Ninjiomi laughed, grabbing a chair and moving it away from Kuro and Mokusei's play fight. Here, sit here and we'll bring the presents over. Izuku sat down in the seat, already tearing up from the realization that they'd gone to the trouble to get him presents and they were so nice. Wait, no, me first. Sun said quickly. I want to go first. Oh, alright, you can go first. He's going to cry though, Hitugi warned. Izuku was already almost crying, it wouldn't take very much. So Izuku, you know what my quirk is, right? Sun asked, smiling softly, kneeling in front of him despite the fact he knew that hurt her knees a lot. Your mallet, it's in a secondary dimension and you can pull it out any time you like, Izuku said immediately. He knew this. Well, I can grant other people access to the dimension, Sun said, putting her hand on Izuku's knee. So, I'm letting you also have access to the mallet. So you can maybe use it when you need to get through the entrance exam. It might help a bit. Make sure you aren't totally defenseless. Izuku did as expected and predicted, burst into tears. Sun rose up to hug him, and he latched onto her, sobbing with the happiness that she would do that for him. The mallet was fun to learn to use, mostly since it let him spend lots of time with Sun, who was loads of fun. He hadn't used such a big weapon before, or a just brute force kind of weapon, but it was lots of fun. He was almost looking forward to the entrance exam now, less than a year away, just so he could use the mallet and properly see what it could do. He hadn't been home in a day or so though, so it was time to head home and sleep on his bed. And pick up a new notebook from his stash. The recent analysis assignments from Tenki were filling up notebooks faster than he'd filled them before. Maybe he should make sure to grab another bunch when he got some allowance. Which happened roughly when his mom remembered he did exist. The retired villains would happily get him a new notebook if he asked, but he liked getting his own and knowing that he'd gotten them and they were his. He blinked in surprise to find a police car parked outside the apartment building. Did something happen? He hadn't come back here last night, but that wasn't a rare occurrence anymore, and he'd been back 2 nights ago, so he didn't think he'd been reported missing. It'd be real awkward if he had been. He'd timed his coming home to be at the right time for the actual volunteer job. He opened the door very hesitantly, and found the police officer sitting on the couch, although there was tea in front of him and the whole thing seemed very relaxed. "Hi," Izuku asked, closing the door behind him and taking off his shoes. The officer turned to look at him and smiled politely. Izuku was mildly weirded out by that, but it didn't look like it was because he'd been reported missing or something. "Hello. Izuku, right?" "Yes." Izuku carefully hung up his backpack on the appropriate rack, followed by the bag holding his clothes from the day before and his swimsuit. He'd need to wash them later. "What's this about?" "There was a robbery earlier today, and it was part of an ongoing case. We needed to ask your mother some questions." "Oh, okay." Izuku inched closer to his room. Almost there. Then he could wait until the police officer was done, come out after his mom had eaten dinner to eat his part, then sleep and go right back to the facility to hang out with the retired villains again. Kurai had promised to play hide and go seek with him for some escape and hiding practice, and Denryo had finally agreed to teach him some about taking out villains, mostly electric types, which would cause him the most issue when he was finally a hero. He knew from watching hours of hero fights that electric-type villains were some of the hardest to fight, and he wanted to be prepared. "I'd like to talk to you too," the officer said pointedly. "Dang it." Izuku changed course to sit down on the other end of the couch from his mom, across from the police officer on their soft chair. What's this about? Was it about the retired villains? Were they wary that he was spending less time at home? He used every single poker face technique he had from Ninjaomi to hide the anxiety from this. "The problem here is that this case is of personal significance to you." The officer sighed. "My name is Tsukachi Naomesa and I'm in charge of the cases in a recent spree of kidnapped quirkless people. The only linking thread we can find other than the lack of a quirk in the kidnapped people and a general lack of care from the people in the area is a nearby robbery. It's always very specific. We think the perpetrator has some sort of camera or technology-associated quirk because we can't catch him on cameras." Izuku considered that technology quirks, while rare, weren't unheard of. Maybe the quirk was specifically making the person indistinct to the cameras? Or they edited the feed afterwards. It'd be hard to tell unless he saw the person, and he highly doubted Tsukachi would like a quirkless kid trying to butt in on the investigation, so he stayed silent. He was so asking Tenki about a quirk like that though, if he knew about one or even had one. So far we haven't found a single one of those already kidnapped, not even their bodies, which either means they're alive, or their kidnapper is that good at hiding bodies. Izuku couldn't help himself asking questions though. Sue him, he was curious. Is there anything with ages or is that completely random? Or something about places besides the robbery thing? Very fortunately for Izuku, Tsukachi seemed to find the questions interesting instead of annoying. The ages are completely random. The earliest was 5 and the oldest was 95, every other kidnapping is between those. Those are both outliers though, most are from the ages of 10 to 50. Still a huge age range. As for places, they seem completely random. If it isn't, we haven't been able to find a link. Tsukachi sighed. "I'm not at liberty to discuss it for you, but it's a problem. We'd like to prevent it from happening here, so if you don't mind having a discreet police tale for your safety and perhaps we can get a look at the kidnapper if he tries for you." Izuku made a note to start carrying around more kunai and shuriken and keep pencils in his hands to defend himself. He'd have to warn Tenki and the others that he'd have limited time. "Alright, do you want me to draw up a schedule for you? To make it easier on the men?" Tsukachi looked rather relieved. "Yes, thank you, that would be very helpful. I'm going to start dinner." While you do that, his mom stood up, brushing off her skirt and smiling. "If you aren't busy, we'd love to keep you for dinner." Tsukachi checked something on his phone, then shook his head, almost in a fond manner. "Sounds good to me. My friends think I need to get out more anyway, this can be my out-of-work socialization for the week." Izuku snickered at that. It was kind of funny. His mom gave him a stern look, but Tsukachi just huffed. "Right, schedule. Do you have paper on you?" Izuku did not, but he had some in his room. "I'll get some, I'll be right back." He grabbed paper and a pencil from his room, hesitating for a second, then grabbing a ruler too. "I don't actually go many places, Izuku explained to the officer sort of sheepishly while drawing out the schedule with hour blocks. Really just to that reformed and retired villain's nursing home that's like 10 minutes away walking. And school? Izuku shrugged. I'm homeschooled by them. I just did the test to make sure I'm getting taught what I need to and passed with flying colors, so I'm ready to take the entrance exam for UA. The test had been really boring, but he had to take it to make sure he could stay in homeschool. They're all really smart. To his credit, Tsukachi barely blinked as he absorbed that. Alright, I'll trust you. Do warn them about this, they'll probably want to know. I was planning to anyway, Izuku said distractedly, trying to decide if he should push the leaving time backwards a bit to allow for more time now that he wasn't going to be able to stay over. He'd better do it. Alright, this is it. Thank you for your cooperation. Tsukachi said, nodding to him. You're welcome, Izuku chirped. A few days later and Tsukachi informed him that they'd caught the guy and rescued all the Quirkless people, and thus it was all done. Weirdly quick, but Izuku figured it was probably Tenki's fault. So he was free to continue on as usual. It was fast approaching the entrance exam and Izuku was getting a little anxious about it. On one hand, he was well prepared. He had the weapons already accepted as something he could bring into the exam on grounds that he didn't have a quirk and thus could bring in weapons. He had added the mallet to the list, even though it was stored in the other dimension. On the other hand, it was the UA entrance exam. How could he not be a bit anxious about it? Still anxious about the entrance exam? Zhen asked during a time when they were both just kind of lounging on the couches after they'd done the speed exercises. Izuku was getting faster, he could tell, and not just because Zhen timed him. Well, Zhen was lounging, Izuku was scribbling in his notebook, mostly notes about questions for Tenki regarding the quirks they'd gone over yesterday. Maybe a bit, Izuku admitted sheepishly, caving under Zhen's knowing gaze. You'll be just fine, Zhen said, yawning deeply as if to punctuate the statement. Unless they have a speed quirk, you're faster than most people, especially teenagers your age. Whatever the thing is, it's not going to kill an average teen. Based on UA's past record of students, the test will not be in my favor, Izuku said, tapping his fingers nervously on his book. They mostly accept students with strong offensive quirk. Eraserhead is one notable exception, but he moved up after the sports festival, instead of entering the hero course immediately. None of them had subtler quirks, and definitely none were quirkless. Just because UA accepts quirkless people doesn't mean that they make it anything short of nearly impossible to get in. Nearly impossible for normal kids maybe, Zhen pointed out. Nearly impossible for anyone without a quirk, Izuku said, fingers drumming faster. Or with a subtle quirk, or with one that specifically affects other people, or really anything that isn't really destructive. Heroing is rarely seen as something for anyone without a destructive quirk, Tenki commented calmly, startling Izuku, who hadn't realized he was there. Don't worry, the hammer and your aim with the weapons will suffice. Even if it is to be a battle against a hero. Would they do that? Zhen asked incredulously, frowning. I was about to say that sounds dangerous, but as someone who's seen the dark side of the underground, that's nothing. Zhen didn't mention his time in the underground very often, although when he did it was big. They'd have the heroes handicapped to a degree if they at all intend for the students to win, Tenki said, shaking his head. It'd take too long with all the prospective applicants. They're more likely to use robots. Maybe with a full-on attack scenario where you have to destroy as many as possible. Since it is a hero school, it'd likely have a heroic saving people component. Tenki was right. There was a full-on attack scenario. This was ridiculous. How did Tenki even guess? This was nuts. Present Mike himself was explaining the whole thing, and Izuku knew he'd seen Eraserhead, Cementos, and even a little glimpse of a shrunk-down All Might. Although he wasn't technically supposed to know about the shrunk thing. Tenki had told him anyway that it was because of a fight when Izuku was younger that had both of them almost killing each other. Izuku was really glad Tenki was reformed now. But seriously, he even got it down to the robots. Present Mike didn't say anything about saving people points, but he was pretty sure they were there. If not, then oh well, he was gonna save people anyway. The big areas they were shuttled to were, well, big, and also surrounded by massive walls. Some other people in his area were someone he recognized as probably related to Ingenium, based on the hair and also the engines in his legs. Most others weren't really recognizable, although he did see a couple obvious quirks, some that might be more helpful than others. One girl in particular was almost vibrating in excitement, and when the bell was rung for them to begin, she raced off like a shot, pink flames springing to life around her legs. But that was cool. Izuku ran too, pulling out a pair of kunai to have in his hands and ready to throw. He'd just have to kill as many robots as he could, and save anyone he could as he went. The robots' weak spots were their necks and their joints. Senbon weren't enough to destroy them or shut them down, unless nailed exactly in the eyes, so he mostly used kunai and shuriken to cut the wires in their joints and necks. It was easier honestly, and Senbon occasionally needed 2 or 3 to actually bring the robot down, so it was more efficient too. For the most part no one really needed his help, but those that did need a little bit, he helped them and continued on. He supposed he hadn't really needed the stress after all. This was pretty easy. That, of course, only lasted until he saw the zero-pointer. The massive skyscraper-sized robot. At least they weren't really supposed to fight it. But he had to make sure everyone was out of its way. He saw the girl who had run ahead earlier trapped under a boulder, trying to lift herself up, but then collapsing, panting. He raced over to her, patting down his pockets quickly. Did he bring snacks with him? It might not help much, but he honestly didn't know if he could do anything else to help her. Are you all right? Maybe in a second, she panted. I might have overused my quirk a bit. I'll be fine if I don't get crushed first. Can I help? Izuku asked, already surveying the boulder. It had a couple weak points, he might not be able to get it off of her, but he could probably lighten the load significantly. Could you lift it if it was lighter? Maybe. She was panting still, but less so. She recovered fast, but maybe not fast enough, since the zero-pointer was getting dangerously close. Izuku calculated the right spots based on stress patterns, summoned the hammer, and hit the rock at a specific point. The whole thing shattered into shards and dust. Oh, that was dramatic, Izuku said, storing the hammer quickly and offering a hand to the girl. Hurry, we should run. Race you, she replied, grinning, pausing to let him get ready to run before sprinting off. Izuku took off after her, grinning as he caught up to her, running neck in neck with her. They skidded to a stop at the entrance, tied. I'll win next time, Izuku promised as they both plopped down in the dust as the end was announced. I look forward to it, she replied, nodding. Name? Izuku Midaria. Ochako Uraraka. In one random twist of fate, both he and his mother were there when the letter came. He was there because his mom had promised to make Katsudon this night to make up for all the time they'd been spending apart since they both realized they could in fact have social lives that weren't each other. Izuku figured it had been good for his mom. She was visibly happier, better rested, and had been recently working out, and was overall a lot healthier. He was pretty sure he was the same way, even if he did sometimes miss her. It was kind of both of their faults that they drifted apart so suddenly though, so Izuku decided to make an effort to be around more. Especially once school started. The letter was delivered right to their door, and Izuku grabbed it just as it touched the floor, obviously spooking the mailman, who stared at him for a long second before backing away slowly. Izuku retreated backward into the apartment without breaking eye contact, then closed the door quickly. That was awkward. Did it arrive? His mom asked, drying her hands on a towel as she came out of the kitchen. Oh, that's wonderful. I can only pray I never meet that man again, Izuku whispered, still shook from the awkward. His mom looked mildly concerned. Honey. It's nothing, Izuku said quickly, eager to not remember that again. That was so embarrassing. The embarrassment of that was quickly eclipsed when he opened the letter to find a disc that turned on to show All Might announcing that he'd made it into Class 1A. Class 1A. The top hero class. He was not embarrassed to say he started sobbing immediately. His mom, being a sympathy crier, also started crying and hugging him happily. I got in. He sobbed, even though she had heard the recording. I got in. You did, she said, his shirt dampening. To be fair, he was also soaking her shirt. You're going to be a hero. I got in. Izuku shouted the second he got in the door to the center. I got in. I'm going to be a hero. Congratulations. Jin shouted, teleporting in and hugging him happily. I'm really glad. What class? I got into 1A. Eraserhead teaches that one, Tenki said, standing up from where he'd been sitting at a table writing. You'll have a good teacher. Izuku nodded, head bobbing like he was one of the bobbleheads Ninjaomi had started collecting. I'm going to be a hero. You were going to be anyway, Heike said proudly, ruffling his hair. You could have easily gotten into general studies and then moved up to the hero course if that was what it took. Did you get everything you need for school already? Tenki asked, although it was a slightly odd question. We put in the order for my uniform, but I haven't decided on my hero costume yet. Izuku held up the form in question. I need to fill this out, then they'll make the costume and stuff. Have lots of pockets, Heike said immediately. Like cargo pants and a looser hoodie you can put stuff in the seams and have loads of hidden pockets. Or like one of Heike's pouches, but I just like bring one of hers, since hers are practically invincible, Jin said, grinning. Do like thick bracers for your arms too, those'll protect you and give you something to block with. Joint support is also necessary, Tenki added. I've seen too many hero costumes without it. Have sensible shoes, joint support, and ensure you have something to filter the air if needed. I also suggest defense against some quirks you can protect against, as well as making sure the clothes themselves give you some protection. Izuku nodded, scribbling it down. Have protection for your ears too, Kyle said, and Izuku looked up to realize he was hanging casually from the ceiling. Don't want someone deafening you again. Izuku blushed lightly, remembering the hearing thing. Right, yeah, better have that. I'd suggest some rubber in the shoes, along with in some gloves. Denryu was next apparently. Izuku was glad this would really make sure he had the best costume he could. It'd hopefully keep him really safe. He scribbled that down too, adding shock absorption to the shoes too. It'd be good. Put temperature stabilizers in too, Kuro said, batting one of Mokusiai's waving arms away from him. And make sure it's fire resistant. Izuku nodded and scribbled those down too. He hoped whoever was making the costumes could do all of this. Suggest metal fibers in the gloves under the rubber and I'll reinforce them, Heike added, smiling. Any metal and I'll strengthen it all. Thanks, Izuku said, nodding. What about colors? You intend to go underground, right? Tenki said expectantly. Darker colors are better. Not pure black, shadows are never that dark, but go with mottled grays. You can add a pop or two of color if you wish. Green maybe to match your hair. Or red to match those ridiculous shoes. See if you can request weapons, if not you can always bring them yourself, but I'd ask anyway. Heike added. Izuku nodded and wrote it down. He was really feeling like a bobblehead at the moment, but that was alright. He'd have the best costume. Have some eye protection, Kyle suggested, eyeing the scribbles Izuku was making of the maybe costume. You'll want it. That was added, and it was really looking like it'd work well. This would be awesome. He was going to be a hero. And have his own hero costume. And remember you can always submit changes for it. Lots of heroes adjust their costume over their career, Tenki reminded him. I'd suggest noting down changes you want done so you can send in several at once, maybe after it gets damaged so they can do the changes while they repair it. Izuku nodded, maybe for the last time. I'll make sure to send this when I get home. Thank you. You're welcome. We don't want you going in unprepared after all, Jin said, ruffling his hair and probably tangling it. Come on, let's celebrate. You got into UA? You're going to inspire quirkless children across Japan, Heike added, grinning. Certainly something to celebrate. Izuku beamed so wide his face hurt, and promised himself he'd make it to the top and be a hero for all the quirkless kids who were told they were useless to the world. Izuku paused at the gate to UA, clenching his hands around his notebook. He had weapons on him just in case, he'd protect himself if needed, and he was ready for school. Heike had helped him fix his clothes up to hide weapons in them, so it was time for school. He didn't move though, stuck in place and unable to actually take that step. It was school. What if Bakugo was in his class? He hadn't seen him in like a year, it had been forever. Tenki said he should just ignore Bakugo, not give him the satisfaction of knowing he was under Izuku's skin, ignore him and hope that didn't go too badly. But he had weapons, real ones, and it would be fine. He could defend himself if needed. He didn't want to, but he could. Midaria. Fancy seeing you here. The bubbly girl from the entrance exam, Uraraka, bounced up beside him, grinning. I'm super glad you got in. It's so nice to see you. You too, Izuku told her, smiling nervously. What class are you in? She asked, adjusting her backpack cheerfully. 1A. Oh, what a coincidence. Let's race. A rematch for last time. Well, it'd take his mind off the anxiety at least. And a warm-up if they were going to do anything today. Okay. Hey you! Uraraka shouted, pointing to a very surprised purple-haired boy that looked vaguely familiar for some reason. Me? He asked, looking around like someone else was being pointed at. Well, do you who else? He didn't have an answer for that. What do you want? Count us off. We're going to race. The teen was obviously extremely confused, but to his credit he did count them off. 3, 2, 1, go? As he said go, Izuku sprang forward, racing for the school and leaping up the stairs as fast as he could, weaving between students like he would the trees in the forests, and ducking into the 1A classroom as soon as he found it. Uraraka got in a moment after him, and barely seemed ruffled. To be fair, neither was Izuku. He'd done much longer sprints. I win, he said proudly, momentarily forgetting why he'd been so anxious about this. Uraraka was nice and wanted to compete with him, so he had at least a friend now. Loud pops from behind him abruptly reminded him why he was so anxious about this. Izuku stiffened, hand dropping down to rest against his waist where he had a kunai pressing reassuringly into his leg and hip. Uraraka tilted her head at him, eyes sharpening as her gaze flickered to over his shoulder, then down to the kunai hilt he was holding to reassure himself that he had the weapon. You know quirk use is illegal without a license, Uraraka commented casually, and a boy that looked a weird amount like Ingenium minus the engine elbows, seized on it, berating Bakugo for quirk use and also for his feet being up on the table. We'd better get to our seats. She commented a second later as the warning bell rang. We can do something else later. I'll win next time. Good luck, Izuku replied, nodding firmly. He could do this. For the new rivalry he'd formed. This would be fine. He sat down in his new seat, which was right behind Bakugo, which didn't calm his nerves any, but Bakugo was occupied with mini ingenium and hopefully, that'd keep him from doing anything before class. The purple guy from earlier entered a bit later, and made eye contact with him before paling slightly, and turning to hurry to his seat. Izuku couldn't think of why he might be paling. Maybe he and Uraraka had left a bad impression earlier. They'd better apologize. After class maybe though, if Izuku could catch him and apologize, befriend him before Bakugo caught him. Failing that, before class tomorrow maybe. Or at lunch. At some point he'd do it. If Bakugo didn't catch and kill him first. If you're just here to make friends, leave now, a gruff voice barked, and Izuku almost vibrated out of his seat when he realized who it was. It was the Eraserhead, the one hero that all of the retired villains could agree was a good hero. He was teaching 1A? Izuku was going to be taught by the Eraserhead. This was awesome. Put these on and follow me outside. Izuku would unironically follow him to the end of the earth if he said to do it. The uniforms were soft and comfortable and really cool. Less places to hide stuff, but he managed to sneak a fair amount of things in anyway. He was out before Bakugo even finished pulling on his pants, out and waiting by Eraserhead while the rest of the class trickled out. He positioned himself between Uraraka and the purple guy, ready to talk to either of them should the situation arise. And also hoping they'd defend him if Bakugo tried to kill him right here. The tests were relatively easy. He definitely wasn't dead last. He'd been training for years with the villains, so of course, he was going to do as well as humanly possible. He was definitely racing Uraraka, but her quirk had some degree of strengthening that let her surpass him pretty easily. Once they were released, Uraraka evidently had the same idea as Izuku since they both ambushed the purple guy. After Eraserhead had released them, he looked vaguely alarmed to see them both waiting for him, but to his credit, didn't run away. Hi! Izuku chirped, offering his hand. I'm Midoriya Izuku. I'm Uraraka Ochako. He stared them down warily, but shook their hands anyway. Shinso Hitoshi. Izuku nearly vibrated out of his skin. Shinso? Do you have a brainwashing quirk? Shinso backed up several steps, staring at him, almost afraid. Why do you care and how do you know? I know your grandma. You what? I have a what? They were said at the same time, but Izuku successfully heard and deciphered them both. Yeah. I know your grandma. Ninjiomi Shinso. She mentioned she had a son that then got married and abandoned his kid who had a quirk just like hers to the foster system after making sure she couldn't get custody. We were gonna look for you once I hit high school, since then you'd be in high school and it'd be easier to override what your dad did to get custody of you. Shinso was now looking rather more surprised than afraid or wary, which was good. What? You can come meet her if you want. If you don't have to be anywhere else, of course. You too, Uraraka. Sure. Uraraka chirped, having since recovered. I'm down. My parents are busy until like 5 anyway. Shinso honestly looked like he had whiplash, which fair, Izuku was getting a bit ahead of himself and really excited. To be fair, he'd just met the grandkid he'd heard about. Why wouldn't he be excited? If you don't want to meet her right now, it can be later, Izuku said, trying to reassure Shinso a bit. And no, I'll meet her, he said after a long second of probably trying to get his words to go, considering the amount of opening then closing his mouth he did. You sure? Izuku double-checked, rocking back and forth on his heels. Yeah. He sounded much more sure of himself now, and Izuku beamed. I'll meet her. She'll love to meet you. Izuku reassured him, spinning on his heel. Come on. This way. They turned up at the apartment, and Izuku let them in with his key. Ninjiomi? Izuku called, looking around. Not in the sitting room, he didn't see her in the kitchen, maybe the bedroom? If she wasn't here then they'd check the proper retired villain's home, but she was usually at the apartment. She's in the bathroom, Heike said, appearing in the doorway to the bedroom. She'll be out in a sec. We found some weird soaps we had to try. Now that they were getting out more, this happened more often, they'd find weird funny things and thus the apartment was starting to collect an eclectic collection of random things. Ooh, did you bring friends in? Heike asked, apparently now realizing Shinso and Uraraka were there. Hello Izuku's friends. Heike, this is Uraraka and Shinso. Uraraka and Shinso, this is Heike. She was the villain Armory. She's retired and reformed now. She taught me how to throw kunai and shuriken. Uraraka grinned and waved. Hello Heike. Izuku and I are rivals. Huh? She called them that first. Now Izuku could put a name to it. So he nodded enthusiastically when Heike shot him an amused look. So, Shinso is it? Heike asked, coming down the hall to flop on the couch. What's your quirk? It's just like Ninjiomi's. Izuku said before realizing Shinso might want to say his quirk by himself and stopped himself quickly. I'm pretty sure you aren't Shinso kid. What's your activation Shinso? Izuku smiled sheepishly. He'd let Shinso answer this time. When people answer after I ask a question. Shinso was hesitant, and Izuku was pretty sure that Heike had picked it up. Ninjiomi needs eye contact. If you want, I'm sure she'd love to train you. What's your quirk, Uraraka? I can affect gravity around other people and myself. Uraraka said proudly. If I use it on both myself and other things, it can really look like I have a lot more strength than I have. Are those pink flames the signal you're using your quirk? Izuku asked, seizing on the chance to ask about something he'd noticed. It means I'm using it on myself. A little flashy, but hey, I don't intend on being an underground hero anyway. I'd suggest you consider a career in rescue work, or at least do some of that on the side, Heike said, pulling a kunai from one of the seams in her sleeves and flipping it through her fingers. Your quirk would be very useful for it, not just for villain catching. I would like to do some rescue work out in the rural areas, Uraraka admitted, rubbing the back of her head. There aren't a lot of heroes out there, and I grew up out there. I know they need heroes out there. Admirable, Ninjiomi said, finally exiting the bathroom, a cup in her hand. A good reason to be a hero. So, you brought classmates Izuku? Yeah, I did. Izuku said, wriggling happily. This is Uraraka, she's my new rival. And that's Shinso Hitoshi. The cup clattered against the ground. Shinso? You aren't joking? Hi, Shinso said, swallowing nervously and waving slightly. I'm Shinso. You look just like me, Ninjaomi said, laughing wetly. Your father always looked like his dad. Sorry if you got my quirk. No, it's fine, Shinso said, apparently entirely unsure what to do with this. Ninjaomi was warily walking towards him, so Izuku and Uraraka left them to it, Izuku pulling Uraraka toward Heiki. I can't say I'm familiar with rural areas, I mostly targeted populated areas, Heiki admitted, grinning crookedly. More BS there. Better collateral damage, Izuku added cheerfully. Oh Uraraka. Wanna try throwing some kunai? It's lots of fun. We have a dedicated room for that stuff, Heiki added, pushing herself up off the couch. Want to learn, kid? Gotta keep up with my rival. Uraraka chirped, hopping up. And new skills are always a good idea. Gotta keep your mind sharp. That's the spirit. Heiki said, grinning. This way. Izuku knew the way already, so he cheerfully led the way. He was super glad he brought them both here. Their heroics teacher was All Might. Tenki's heroic nemesis. This was so cool. Izuku would definitely be telling Tenki about this when he headed there after school. It was probably Tenki's help and Ninjaomi's previous insistence on getting a foster license beforehand that got Shinso moved in with her so quickly. Now he was much happier living with his grandma. And Izuku had a friend he could actually bring home to his mom. Uraraka too got to meet his mom. They hit it off, of course, and Izuku was so happy. He was off track, but back to the All Might thing. He was their teacher. Izuku got to learn from the #1 hero. And they got to try on their hero costumes this time. Izuku had given mostly just notes, but it looked really cool in the case. It looked even cooler when he put it on, since it was mostly mottled grays and dark browns and greens, breaking up his form and giving him much better camouflage. The gloves were thick, and a note on a second pair of gloves gave him options between rubber gloves for electricity, thinner ones with metal inlays for normal use, and thicker ones for cold weather or situations he'd need them for. They had their own pocket on his belt, which was full of pouches. He'd drawn a little example of one of Heiki's pouches, and while there wasn't that exactly, the design compromised with a set of straps and a few extra pouches that could both function as something you'd see with climbing equipment and hold more pouches. Izuku thought it was brilliant. There were little hearing aid-looking things in a case, with a "for hearing protection" note, so those also went in their lab-led pouch. A visor took care of the eye protection, with a mask to hang around his neck in case he needed the extra disguise or air filtration. It also apparently had a voice changer in it. He'd wondered if they'd be able to add that. There was joint support both built into the costume itself and in added joint protection that could go under the costume to add more support. The shoes were thick and practical and pretty tall for ankle support, and it was just really cool. Wow dude, that looks really cool, Kaminari said, adjusting his jacket. You're really prepared. Well yeah, I have to be. Izuku chirped, poking around in the box then reopening his locker. No weapons in the box, so he was now glad he'd brought his own. I am quirkless, so I have to think of some of this stuff. Not that it wouldn't be beneficial for someone with a quirk, it really would, but I just have one less tool in my box, so I gotta add more on my own. You're quirkless? Kirishima asked in clear astonishment. Really? Yeah. Izuku said, mildly confused. Did you not know that? What quirk did you think I had? I dunno, an analysis quirk or something? Kirishima looked even more confused now. How weird. We do exist, yeah, Izuku said dryly, grinning. He started loading weapons into the pouches, and once he'd finished, he glanced up to find everyone staring at him. What now? Dude, you just pulled like 40 weapons out of your locker. Where were you keeping them? Mostly in my clothes, Izuku admitted. And I pulled out 53 weapons. I left the other 7 with my stuff just in case. 53 should be plenty for whatever we're doing. Why did you bring 60 weapons to school? Ida shouted, apparently now invested in the conversation. That is not allowed. Oh, sorry? I figured it's a hero school, and I feel better if I have the weapons on me. I can bring less tomorrow if it makes you feel better. Izuku smiled politely, closing his locker again and double-checking the case. He didn't find any hidden weapons, just a note about him having to go see Snipe in order to be given the go-ahead to have weapons from the official companies. Oh, I guess I'm going to see Snipe during my free PRD tomorrow. Oh well, I'll use my own weapons for now. You shouldn't have weapons at all. Ida sounded like he was going to have an aneurysm. I'm not going to not bring any weapons in, sorry, Izuku apologized, putting his case down under the bench. I can promise I have proper training in them. I'm willing to show that. Ida seemed to stall at that, apparently trying to process it. Oh geez, we'd better get out there, Kirishima said, looking at his phone. We gotta go. Right. Izuku said, also looking at the time. They'd been in here too long. He quickly ducked around Ida, hurrying out the door, Shinso following close behind in his uniform, which was black with a mask kinda like Izuku's hanging around his neck, although it was almost hidden by the very Eraserhead-like scarf around his neck. Super cool costume, Izuku approved. They were set up in pairs, and were going to go against each other in a hero versus villain conflict. Izuku kinda hoped he and Uraraka got villain cause then he could put a lot of his knowledge to use, but hero would work too. They did end up getting hero, but that was okay. They were going up against Bakugo and Ida anyway. Okay, you have to keep Bakugo occupied, Izuku said immediately. He'll want to go after me, but if you keep him occupied and unable to get to me, he'll start getting frustrated really quick and you'll be able to beat him. I can get to Ida and to the bomb if you can keep Bakugo entertained. Deal, Uraraka chirped, grinning. I'll take care of it, you get your part. Izuku nodded firmly. Bakugo always starts with a right hook, use that to your advantage. He'll get angrier the longer you delay him and there's no sight of me. Got it? Uraraka nodded, eyes sparkling. This'll be fun. He'll take you really seriously, he won't underestimate you because of your gender, Izuku warned quickly. Alright, you go in the front, I'm going to climb up the side. Tell me when you've found Bakugo and where he is. Roger. Uraraka headed right for the entrance, and Izuku went around the back to start climbing the wall. It was an easy wall to climb, almost easier than some trees he'd climbed, so he made it up to the 3rd story without much difficulty. He started climbing around the building face he was on, peeking in windows and waiting for Uraraka to say where Bakugo was so he could enter without fear of running into him. Okay, I can see him now, he's already annoyed and yelling, I'm on the 2nd floor. I don't think the bomb is on this floor or the 1st one because I think he's working his way down. Okay, I got it. Izuku chirped quietly. I'll start on the 3rd floor and work my way up. Feel free to take your time, I want to get a good fight in. Uraraka turned off the comm, leaving Izuku to his own devices. He slid open a window, entering the building that way. There were cameras in several corners, probably so the other students could watch and the teacher could supervise, so Izuku just winked at one before ignoring them. He could hear Ida now, although it didn't sound like it came from the floor he was on. He swiveled his head around, tilting it and using what Kyle showed him to locate the sound. Up and to the right. Izuku started heading for the room, hearing Ida monologuing to himself. It was easy to track. He found Ida almost immediately and hid right outside the room. I found Ida, I'll wait a bit to go in, I want to hear the rest of this monologue. A barked laugh came from Uraraka's side, followed by several explosions. Take your time. I'm having a blast. An angry scream followed before she cut off, and Izuku settled in to listen to the monologue. It was very impressive. He would know. He was an expert. He finally decided to enter, sneaking in with all his stealth, finding the room completely empty. Ida must have been prepared for Uraraka, so now she had no ammo to use. That was pretty clever. Unfortunately, Uraraka was busy with Bakugo, and Izuku always carried his own ammo. Ida didn't notice him sneaking in along the side, so Izuku made it all the way to the bomb. A bit of the capture tape around Ida's ankle, which he also didn't notice, and a tap to the bomb, and Izuku's team won. Ida reacted with comical shock when he saw Izuku. Izuku, how did you get in here? Izuku blinked at him for a moment. I walked in? You were too distracted to notice. I also got you with capture tape. He pointed to it, and Ida looked down to see as well. Further shock was expressed as Uraraka and Bakugo burst into the room. Bakugo looked very angry, while Uraraka looked smug, holding his wrists firmly secured with capture tape in one hand. Looks like we won both ways. Uraraka chirped, grinning. Good job, rival. Good job to you too. Izuku said, nodding and smiling back. He ignored Bakugo, not wanting to try and do anything that might remind the volatile teen about the previous run-in they had. The other fights were just as awesome, and Izuku watched attentively, muttering under his breath in Egyptian so he'd remember what he saw better. The quirks of this class were so cool. Maybe he should ask some of them if they wouldn't mind him doing a full analysis on their quirks and giving it to them so they could improve and get better. It'd be really cool to see their reactions and if he was right or not. He was already doing it for Uraraka, and Shinso's was close enough to his grandma's that a lot of the same mechanics applied. Shinso was already having a lot of progress with Ninjaomi helping him. It was super cool to watch. He managed to avoid Bakugo the rest of the time, sticking next to Uraraka and Shinso, who were effective Bakugo repellent. They had to pick a president for the class, which was a little anxiety-inducing, especially when Izuku was picked as the president, mostly because he beat Bakugo at something, and previously that was always a really bad idea. Uraraka was sitting next to him though, and when it looked like he was going to explode, she muttered something to him. He, shockingly, didn't explode her face, and instead sat back down, fuming. Izuku decided he didn't want to know. Yaoyorozu was his vice president, and she seemed really level-headed and smart, plus her quirk was really cool. He managed to get her phone number since they did need to work together for stuff, and she agreed to let him ask her a bunch of questions about her quirk and help her strengthen it, which was the coolest. There were an awful lot of reporters the next day, even though Izuku arrived really early so he could track down Snipe and ask if he could have weapons from the support department. He accidentally startled Snipe when he popped up next to the teacher. Oh, sorry I startled you. Izuku apologized quickly. I had a note in my hero costume case that said to talk to you if I wanted weapons with my costume. As far as I've heard from Aizawa, you don't need more weapons, Snipe commented in accented Japanese. But yes, you'll need a note from a teacher that says you're properly trained in whatever weapons you want. Oh, but could we do that now, or would after school be better? Snipe eyed him warily. What weapons did you want to work with? Izuku wondered if he wanted an example or if he just wanted to be told. Probably told. If Ito was right, he wasn't supposed to have weapons. Heike disagreed with that, so he had weapons anyway, but maybe showing that to a teacher was a bad idea. Shuriken, kunai, and senbon. I was sorta hoping to learn something like a sword or something else mid to close range, but I don't know anyone who knows how to use those. Well, Heike kinda knew, but she didn't have any formal education with it, so she was refusing to teach him in case he could find a better teacher. Which was probably a good choice. Bad habits would be hard to break, so it was better to wait. You have some prior training in them? Snipe asked, although Izuku couldn't tell his expression through the mask, which was a little strange. He sounded somewhere between impressed and concerned though. Yep. Izuku chirped. It's easier and probably better to have support course-made weapons instead of using my own, since those are easier to restore and get more of. Alright, you'll have to come with me and show you know how to use those before the support department will let you have any. Thank you, Izuku said, beaming. It took weirdly long for Uraraka to actually meet Tenki, but Izuku assumed it was on purpose and didn't question it. Tenki greeted her calmly and politely, and then left, leaving them to their own devices. Which was some more competitions. Currently Izuku was in the lead. Just by 1 point, but he was. Tenki pulled him aside after Uraraka left though, just before he needed to leave to go back home for dinner. Okay, so I have something to tell you, Izuku. Oh no, that didn't bode well. What? Izuku asked anxiously. Well, I mentioned I used to be called All for One? Yeah, and that All Might opposed you. Well, I didn't say that All Might has a quirk that was passed down through a chain of successors stemming from my brother back in the dawn of quirks. Ever since it started, all users have been steadfastly trying to make sure I died. None have succeeded yet, although All Might believes I am dead due to a fight we had a long time ago. Izuku had all the pieces, and so he put them together. All Might went missing and just mysteriously went on leave for a weird amount of time a few years ago, before Izuku met Tenki. What did you do to him? Why did he disappear afterwards? Tenki winced. Well, just tell me, I'm a high schooler and going into heroics, I can handle it. He could not, in fact, handle it, and threw up into a trash can instead. His stomach was not the strongest thing ever, even if he was trying to work on it. That imagery had just been too much. Sorry, Tenki said visibly. What I'm trying to say is that young Uraraka received his quirk. She is the next holder of the quirk, called One for All. I don't suggest informing her that you are aware of this, she might try to kill me, or All Might will come here and do it, and I'd rather not do that. Izuku could do nothing but start laughing. He, Tenki's student in all but name and practically his grandkid, was eternal rivals with All Might's successor. He buried his face in his hands and just laughed. When he did finally calm down, he was sent home with a note of apology for accidentally keeping him late. Inko accepted that when Izuku made the excuse that he hadn't been feeling well and they wanted to make sure he was good to walk home. With how green he was still feeling about the All Might injury, it wasn't hard to make it work. He did go to school the next day anyway. They were having a field trip after all. What do you think the field trip will be? He asked Uraraka on their way to a table with their lunches. It has to be hero-related, right? Yeah, it does. I don't think we're doing anything with villain apprehension yet, so maybe it's rescue-based? It's too early for any intelligence exercises too, Shinso said, yawning. So yeah, probably rescue. We'd stay on campus for anything else too. Rock, paper, scissors, Uraraka declared randomly. Izuku ignored Shinso's exhausted sigh and played rock, paper, scissors with Uraraka over their lunches. Competing with his rival, what better way to spend the lunch? And eating, of course. Eating was always a good idea. Izuku heard the first bits of 13's speech about how quirks could kill people and tuned it out in favor of staring at the rest of the area. It was so cool. Since 13 was a famous rescue hero, the trip really was about rescuing people. Uraraka had been right. Uraraka's quirk really was super good for rescues, and a lot of the class could probably easily use their quirks in ways that would help. Like Kaminari, who could probably get training so he could act as a defibrillator in really bad situations. Or Momo, who could make anything she needed. Ida could get people to safety really quick, and Koda could send his animals to find people faster, or, I'll find and rescue more people than you. Uraraka's declaration broke him from his thinking and also muttering in ancient Greek. You're on, Izuku replied, smiling. He could do this. They both could. They were on the being rescued side of the shipwreck zone, Uraraka pretending to drown out in the water and Izuku pretending to be a panicked civilian that was too scared to come out of a closet on the sinking ship. Koda managed to coax him out with the promise of petting his rabbit, which Izuku assured him was an excellent bribery method. Koda seemed reassured by that. Uraraka had also been saved, although by Tsuyu pulling her out of the water. They were rescuers for the fire zone, and Izuku was super glad for his costume because it was fireproof and pretty good at keeping him cool. No one got burnt luckily, although Ojiro was looking a little bit sunburnt. Izuku got 3 people, and so did Uraraka, so it was a tie and time to move on. Bakugo seemed to be struggling a bit as the classmates gave him a bit of a hard time for being so rough with them. Izuku thought it was funny, but didn't laugh cause he was a little bit scared of Bakugo still. Even if he had the weapons from the support department with his costume now. They were perfectly balanced and good for throwing. By the end of it, Izuku and Uraraka were equal in their rescues. Tragic, but they could solve this. With rock, paper, scissors. All Might presided, although Izuku still wasn't sure why he'd been needed on this trip, but he was useful now, and Uraraka won that. Good game. Izuku chirped, grinning and offering his hand to shake. She shook it cheerily, and with that, they had to get back on the bus. Then it was back to the school and back to normal stuff. Normal for a hero school anyway. Tenki paused in his writing, raising his head and considering it. Something wrong? Heike asked, tilting her head and looking up from her reading. I'm not sure. I feel like I forgot something. Izuku has his field trip today, right? Tenki nodded slowly. That wasn't it, or at least he was pretty sure it wasn't. Well, if you do remember, tell me. Good luck remembering. Tenki hummed, going back to his writing. Perhaps it was nothing. So, check the top of this FIC and you'll find something very interesting. Namely, this FIC is now in a series, and it has another FIC in with it. Congratulations, you all now know I am a liar because here I am, back in Imiche after I said I probably wouldn't be back. I'm sure you're overjoyed. Go funnel that joy into the one-shots that'll start coming out for this. Feel free to suggest ideas for stuff you'd like to see out of this universe. I can't promise I'll be able to do them all, but better to know than to have never asked.